Tuesday's nomination day saw a record of 181 candidates from 10 parties file their papers to contest all 89 seats in 16 GRCs and 13 SMCs for GE 2015 for the first time since 1965. Actually, it's 9 political parties contesting. No walkovers. This means for the first time, all 2.46 million eligible Singaporeans will be able to cast our vote in a general election. Campaigning has started, packed rallies, passionate speeches, and the first salvos appear to have been fired. Election fever, the 5-year itch, you may call it, has begun. But beyond the rhetoric, the polemics, we need to set aside time to discuss and debate the issues that really matter in a robust, honest, and hopefully sensible way. This is what I feel has been missing in the election coverage all these years. Party political broadcasts are important for the contesting parties to state their stand and make their pitch, but these don't really help to deepen our understanding of key issues at stake. The big issues, the real issues. Also, in a general election, the electorate is increasingly interested to know more about the contesting parties and the candidates. Not just what they can or profess to do, but who they really are and what they stand for, both the parties and the candidates. Yes, it is critical for parties to win votes in an election. But in a general election such as this, political parties have a responsibility, indeed, a duty, to be more transparent and step up to greater scrutiny by the electorate. This is especially so for parties that are more established and fielding candidates in several wards. We in IQ feel that one of the best ways for the electorate to gain such important insights into the parties and the key candidates is to have their leaders debate on big issues. To be effective, this debate has to be spontaneous, free-flowing, and robust, and at the same time remain gentlewomanly as well. The beauty of the visual medium is that it captures the essence of the person. No matter how well trained you might be, PR skills, if you are not authentic and honest, it will show. And often, the unspoken word says it all. Welcome to a very special edition of election coverage, Debate IQ. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan. You're watching Singapore's first ever video recorded spontaneous debate, a live, totally unedited debate between political parties on issues that matter. This 1.5-hour debate will be no holds barred and free-flowing. To have a more meaningful exchange, we have invited the major parties contesting in the election, and I would like to commend the parties taking part today for making time to be here, despite the immense pressures. The PAP, the SDP, and the SPP. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We went out of our way to invite the Workers' Party to join us, but they have chosen not to participate. I find this highly regrettable. Let me now introduce our panelists. Representing the People's Action Party, PAP, is K. Shanmugam, Minister for Law and Foreign Affairs. Representing the Singapore People's Party, SPP, is Benjamin Pui. Representing the Singapore Democratic Party, or SDP, is Professor Paul Tambaya. We also have on the panel Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the Singapore Management University, SMU, as an expert political commentator. Gentlemen, welcome. In studio, we have an audience comprising members of the public, informed and interested and politically neutral, at least on paper. Thank you for joining us. This discussion is being streamed live, so do call in with your questions on 6516-2003 or text in via Poll Everywhere. You'll find the links on our site, iq.sg. Right, let's get this fire started. Shanmugam, I'd like to ask you the first question. As we are all aware, Workers' Party Chief Lau Tia Kiang a few days ago issued an open letter suggesting that it was the Workers' Party's involvement in Parliament, the pressure they had put in Parliament, that has resulted in significant policy shifts since 2011 until now. He talked about, for example, in the 2011 manifesto, he the recommendation was that employers should give priority to hiring Singaporeans. And then he said the fair consideration framework that the Ministry of Manpower came up with subsequently in 2014 was a result of their manifesto and their pressure. He also talked about the hospitalization insurance factor. To cover acute hospital bills, there should be a compulsory basic hospitalization insurance scheme with co-payment of the premium for the government. That was in the Workers' Party Manifesto 2011. And he suggests that the 2015 MediShield Life plan that's going to be introduced is a consequence of that. Now, several ruling party leaders, for example, Finance Minister Tharman Shanmugam, DPM, he highlighted, and I quote him in the Economic Society speech, he said, "The world did not start in 2011. We made very clear our intention and motivations in 2007, for example, in the work fair." ESM Goh Chok Tong said, after 2011, the Prime Minister did more of this to correct the system. But is it because of more people from the opposition in Parliament or because the needs of the people have changed? What's your take on this, your comment?
You go back to the facts. I think the rhetoric, who did what, why, you got to go back to the facts. If you look at the DNA of the PAP, it starts out with being practical. What does the population need? It depends on the socio-economic factors and the demographics. So it started out as a party which was on the social democratic side in 1959. And then, free market was always important. From 2007, it was quite clear what the globalization and its impact was going to be. Our lower wage workers were going to be impacted, but not just lower wage workers, across the sector. And so a series of steps were taken, one, to strengthen our economy. Because if you don't have a strong economy, you don't have jobs. Two, to then do transfers in a more, we were doing transfers through housing, education, and so on, but also do other kinds of transfers. Workfare is minimum wage, except that instead of burdening the company, it is the government which pays. And I gave this example. Workfare goes up to $1,900 today. It's in Malaysia, a starting lawyer gets 2,500 ringgit. Workfare covers up to 5,700 ringgit in Malaysia. So you see a series of steps that were taken since 2007. And I think it's quite clear the shift started as a result of international economic and social transformations.
But somehow, on the ground, I take your point, but somehow on the ground it wasn't felt. In fact, economist Walter Teixeira actually said this. Despite all the changes, all the initiatives, which he recognizes are quite significant, there's this perception gap. A lot of people on the ground are not feeling this economic reality in their daily lives. Yes. I'm sure you've heard this, Minister. So what's your sense?
Well, Vishwa, I think in these things, I prefer to deal with facts. Okay, let me give this to you, and let me give this to the other panelists. If you look at the income growth, the first chart, low-income households grew by 37% in Singapore compared with 16% in Finland. Okay, so let's deal with facts rather than an individual saying some things. Second, Gini coefficient. You look at the lines, Singapore is lower than Finland or United States or United Kingdom. Gini coefficient.
This is before taxes.
Before taxes, so let's come to that.
And transfers.
So the third chart. In the end, Finland is Gini coefficient ends up being lower than ours because they do a much higher rate of taxation. So I don't think there's one right way of doing things, but I think it's a question of putting to the population, look, these are the consequences and this is the system you run. But then you look at the middle income households, for every $1 in taxes, they get back $2 from the government. And finally, and this is critical for our social mobility, we compare with, say, Singapore, Canada, Denmark, which is often held as a model. 14% of our people in the lowest 20%, 20th percentile, move up to the highest 20th percentile, which is much higher than any of these other countries. So I can deal with it in facts, in figures, and the fact that, despite a great financial crisis, our unemployment rates did not shoot up. Our home ownership is still at above 90%. Our people have jobs, and we are looking at a fairly sort of, economically, when compared with what has gone on in the rest of the world, we've managed it well. We have helped our people who are less able to help themselves.
Right.
Now, individual cases, subsections, when we identify, and it's not perfect, let's not get this wrong. It's not perfect. We can always do more. We must do more, but with the balance that you must always look at the trade-offs, because ultimately there will be trade-offs.
Well, Paul, I saw you expressing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm an academic, and in general, we like to, analyze data that gets presented to us.
You're a man of science. Yes.
And I do a little bit of social science as part of the epidemiology work that I do. And these are very nice, colorful graphs. But the concern that I have is in trying to mesh the two. Like, for example, if you take the Gini coefficient after taxes and transfers, it's always an issue of definition. See? And I asked this question to Mr. Chanchan Singh before at one of the forums that Gillian organized some time back. See, the definition of transfer is critical in understanding who gets the benefit, who are the beneficiaries, in other words, of the transfers. And I asked him, if you look at the Singapore budget, the largest proportion of income of the budget goes towards defense. And if you are protecting the territory of Singapore, a large proportion of the territory is owned by a small proportion of individuals. See, the average Singaporean owns a certain amount of space in the air. The Ng family, for example, owns a considerable amount of land on the ground. So if you were to dissect this in a scientific and in a very, very mathematical approach, you could argue that the average Singaporean whose tiny little space in the air is being defended by our excellent armed forces is actually getting a minimal benefit. Whereas the Ng family, which not just the Ng family, the Koo family or whatever, all the wealthy families in Singapore who own significant portions of the land, they are benefiting disproportionately from the amount of money which is spent on defense in Singapore as compared to the amount of money that is spent on social services.
Okay,
and
so what you're talking
education
about
and
is
stuff like
the issue of income disparity.
Correct.
No, I don't think it's income disparity.
actually
He's saying that the rich get more out of being protected with Singapore as a sovereign state. I will have a question on that.
Yes.
So does that lead to the conclusion that we don't need to defend because it's the rich who benefit more?
No, I disagree.
Yeah. So we need to defend
We
Singapore.
need to defend, but it's the amount of defense.
That's a separate point.
And if I were for myself, you see, part of my defense is the security that we're not going to be I'm not going to be a victim of a terrorist attack. But the other part of my defense is also the reassurance in knowing that if I do get sick, if I get struck by cancer or something like that. See, I'm very fortunate. I work for the university. The university has excellent health plan. See, and employer-funded healthcare provides a huge portion of Singapore's healthcare expenditure. See, but people who do not work for the university, in fact, that's one of the reasons why people stay with NUS, is because we have really, really good benefits. That's the reality. It's a great university, of course, but we do have good benefits.
Okay, enough of plugging NUS.
Yes.
No,
but my point is
yeah.
that, you see, to an average individual, protection from terrorism, from external threat is important. But it's just as important to be protected from cancer or from the consequences of disease.
So are you talking about reducing the amount we spend on security or increasing the amount we are currently spending on?
That's a no-brainer.
No.
Obviously, increasing the amount that we spend.
So it's not so
on
much.
No. The STP's program is to cut defense by 40%.
Yeah.
Yes.
So are you suggesting that we
serious
should
about
cut
that?
defense or just increase?
So I'm glad you asked that question because Vivian asked that question as well yesterday. And my take on it is that, I think what it has to be is smart use of defense funds. I've been I enlisted in the SAF in 1983, a long, long, long time ago, and I finally received my MR certificate earlier this year. And over the years, I've seen the transformation from a 1G to a 2G to a 3G. And soon one day we'll have an army of cyborgs, who you just have a little kid sitting there playing computer games. And we'll be able to control the whole of Southeast Asia.
That's somewhat simplistic.
Somewhat simplistic, but the general idea.
Let's get to the point. So what is it that you are arguing for?
Yeah, so what I'm arguing for is, I guess you can take it one step backwards, you see. What I'm arguing for is that there has to be participatory, there has to be this discussion. This discussion that we're having in this room is great. It's a wonderful opportunity. But I think in a real, true democratic society, these things have to be on the table. People have to decide. It's not just once every 5 years you choose whether you want the party which provides stability, etc., or you want some alternative voices, because those choices are too stark. What I'm talking about is that every year when the budget comes up for debate, see, it's 81 versus 7, or 80 versus 7, or whatever it is.
Okay, so that's the SDP's position,
right? That
we need to cut the defense budget.
Well, that's one of the possibilities. In order to fund, you see, I think the society has to decide, you see, which is more important, or if they're both equally important, how are you going to fund them? How is there a way of doing it?
So what you're saying is that the government, what you're also saying is that the government should consult the people a lot more as to what they want.
Definitely.
On defense matters as well?
And I think on defense matters as well. And I think this is, for a long time, defense in Singapore has been viewed as sort of a black box. You trust us, we'll take care of it. And the government has done a pretty good job. The ministers of defense, the professionals, the Singapore Armed Forces creams off the top students every year, with the SAF scholarships. So, but there's no guarantee that this is going to continue going forward. Right now, there are many questions about the F-35, for example, which is a huge investment. And it would be great if Singaporean defense scientists, experts in aviation, people who know about it, could debate the F-35 and Singapore's commitment to the F-35.
Okay, point taken. Eugene, you were looking uneasy.
I think certainly I think on many issues we could do with more discussion, but I think that assumes that the population is able to jump into these discussions in a knowledgeable manner. Because I think the last thing we want is a Swiss-style democracy in which you go by referendums, where I think in the end, if people are not equipped to handle issues, we might be doing ourselves in. And I'm also concerned because I don't think in the end we should try to pitch the haves against the have-nots. Right? So the idea that, could we make the case that in social spending, that perhaps even the rich, the haves would probably gain more, right? Could it be that case as well? Because in a way, one could say that if you look at Singapore's system, who has been able to benefit the most, and then you would say, well, it's those who have been able to extract the most out of the system, then there'll be no end to it. So we'll be put in this haves against have-nots, which I think we should be careful about.
Yeah,
right. And Shanmugam, you want to say something about this? Has the government really been grappling enough? It has been grappling, but has it been grappling enough about some of these socio-economic issues? That's a question.
I would make 2 points. One, in respect of Paul's point, cutting defense by 40%, I think, is a very significant point. And one should put across the consequences of that in the current regional context to the population. Second, I think the STP program also not only wants to cut defense by 40%, but also impose a corporate tax, increase the corporate taxes, impose a luxury tax, and presumably increase GST as well. What does it do to our 70% of Singaporeans employed by SMEs? Because in an investment-led economy, your MNCs have a choice of going elsewhere. Hong Kong's tax rate is 17%, ours is higher. You increase it, they have a choice. Then your SMEs and local corporates who have no choice will be the ones who will be paying those additional taxes, and will they be able to compete in an international environment? You've got to ask yourself, what's the foundation of your wealth? Second, I would take it that defense is something that is important for us as a sovereign state. It's not a question of Mr. Ng Teng Fong or the Ng family versus the man in a 3-room HDB flat. All of us are Singaporeans. We want this country to survive. Defense is essential for our survival. Second point, in terms of grappling with the social consequences, I would say this, I agree with Eugene, and I will say this. It cannot be a system where the rich benefit and the poor don't, because living in a society, if you are not cohesive, it will not survive. The rich will not be able to make the money. So which is why there have got to be transfers. And we believe in transfers, and in fact, there's a substantial amount of transfer that takes place. For every dollar that the lower income earner pays in GST, because 65% of Singaporeans don't pay income tax, they get $4 in benefits. For every dollar that a middle income pays in taxes, they get back $2.
Yeah.
And most of your taxes are paid top 20%.
Yeah.
So that transfer takes place, and I think it takes place in a fairly efficient way, because the government is only 17% of the GDP in terms of cost. Can we do more? I think we always can do more. Universal healthcare insurance. We always have to make sure that it is financially stable and fundable.
Right. Yeah. Before we go into the healthcare segment.
Yeah, but can I just
quick one.
make a quick one? Couple of points. First is that we've actually proposed an increase in the income tax for the top 1% of the population, and that's in our 2012 healthcare proposal.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, in the 2015 budget, DPM Tharman has
Top
proposed the
5%.
top 5%.
Yeah.
So it's actually spreading it a lot broader than the narrow focus that we had.
So you're not going to claim that it's because of your
No,
recommendation?
I mean he's gone even further than us. He's affecting the 2 to 4%, which probably includes you.
Yeah.
But sorry. But I think the other point is that for every dollar that a wealthy person pays in capital gains tax or estate duty, he gets an infinite amount of benefits. Because in Singapore, there's zero capital gains tax and there's zero estate duty. So as DPM Tharman pointed out, this increase in taxes for the top 5% is going some way to making taxes a little bit more progressive than they are in Singapore.
And I think most Singaporeans appreciated that.
Yes, I think they did. I mean, even we did.
It had a very powerful signaling effect.
Yes.
Now, also, we may not need to debate this too much, in the sense that the STB proposal says we spend $10.5 billion in healthcare.
Yeah.
I think you got our figures wrong, because you're assuming we are spending $4 billion. We're actually spending $9 billion. So we're not that far apart. And the government is projecting to spend $13 billion in a short order. So, but I don't want to go, turn it into a healthcare debate. But I think the consequences of that taxes have got to be put across to Singaporeans. Because, as I said, there is no one can say this is absolutely the right way. There are different paths. They have different trade-offs. If that is the path that is proposed, I think one has got to be honest and say, these are the consequences, and these are the costs, and these are the taxes.
Right. So, Ben, I'd like to put this to you and find out what your view and SPP's view would be, as well as Secretary General of DPP. You may want to comment on that as well. Sure. Now, the question here is, the point is we have a choice. As a society, we have a choice. Whether we want to accumulate a lot more cash in hand and pay less taxes, or be prepared to pay more taxes in order for us to be able to have a more equal society over time. So what is your view? It's a choice, and there are trade-offs in those choices.
Maybe I could take a step back and just respond to your beautiful charts as well. And I'll start on a very personal level. So when I was an admin officer in the civil service, I did a lot of policy planning, put up proposals to ministers, came up with policy formulation around numbers as well.
Right.
And it's interesting because after I left government and I relocated to China, and because of my work in MFA, I was also dealing with the mainland Chinese central government with all the numbers. I was suddenly confronted with the fact that on the ground, the people were feeling very differently from what the numbers were saying. And I totally respect numbers. We need to be fact-based.
I took this from DPM Tharman's speech to the Economic Society.
Absolutely. And I think that the challenge for any government, especially in Singapore moving forward into the next few years, is to say, how do you balance a very hard scientific data-based policy formulation approach with the fact that the people on the ground are feeling something very different from what the policy intention could be. And that balance is not an easy one to achieve, But we in SPP and DPP, we feel that that balance involves listening to the ground, engaging the ground a lot more. And to Eugene's point, I think, yes, I don't think necessarily everybody on the ground has the ability to dialogue on policy formulation level, but there's an amount of listening and an amount of hearing what they're saying and then saying, why do our people still feel like that, right? Which is quite different from facing the people and saying, these are all the reasons, these are all the numbers, why you should not feel like that. And I think that the dilemma that I think any one of us political parties facing this election is that regardless of how well Singapore is doing, regardless of the numbers, regardless of the policies, you do have a huge percentage, over 30% in some constituencies, over 40% is voting for alternative parties. So there must be something on the ground that's not right, that's making this disjunct between the numbers and the figures and the policy with how it's being felt on the ground. So from DPP and SPP, and obviously I take my cue from my mentor, Mr. Chiam, who's been in Parliament for many years and has been on the ground, knows every resident by name. There's something about that ground feel, the fact that the people on the ground, the voters, the residents, feel that their MP is side by side with them, is a human figure, is a person that they can speak to, they can understand. And that closeness is something which we hope to bring into Parliament, and that closeness is something that we'd also encourage all of our political parties across the board to say we need to bring that more. And that also comes to the point about where we want to build a team for the future. That team needs to be a very strong compact, social compact between the man on the ground that feels the impact of policies like this, plus the policymakers that are looking from a certain height. Well, I was taught in the government to be a helicopter, right? Yeah. And that's something which I still believe today. And a lot of times, my best bosses used to tell me, when you're a helicopter, you must always remember to always come all the way down to the ground and hit the ground and stay on the ground long enough before you go back up to a height again. And that's a difficult part, because a lot of times the issues that we deal with at the national level, the policy making is as a height.
Yeah.
And we go down, we don't just touch, raise, and then go up again. We stay down on the ground.
So
how long?
So I've got 2 quick points before we throw it open on the floor, right? 2 quick points. Number 1, are you suggesting that the PAP is not doing what you're saying should be done? That's number 1. Number 2, would you not agree that being the government, there is a certain amount of pressure for you, as you yourself said, going up, coming down? Absolutely. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
You know, and if you choose to stay down and talk to the people and make them happy, for example, you may not actually have enough time to go up and make decisions that may not actually help the people.
May
So
I
whatever
say
it is,
something?
I think it's important for
Absolutely.
us to ask that question.
Sure.
Thank you. You see, Ben, thanks.
Yes.
In essence, I cannot agree more that, policy making cannot simply be based on numbers. It has to have the feel on the ground and what people are saying. And I think I may have a slight disagreement with you as to whether we do it or not.
Well, I'm not saying that you're not doing it. I'm just saying that the balance.
And those are not policies; those are the results of policies, and those are hard data in terms of income increase and mobility and social mobility and issues like that. In any given situation, whatever the government does, I think in a modern polity you must expect a significant number of people to disagree or have a different point of view.
Absolutely.
And that is par for the course. You accept it, and what you have to do is to look at what would benefit the majority, Singaporeans as a whole, and then go out and explain. And one of the challenges in policy making and policy implementation, not just in Singapore, in any country, is that what is necessary, what is good in the long term and medium term, may not be politically popular in the short term. And how do you convince people about the long term and the medium term? And at the same time, not only look at the long term and medium term, but you also got to deal with short term issues.
Absolutely.
So those balancing issues, I would say that, our MPs go down to the ground on a very regular basis, keep in touch closely, ears to the ground, understand and then try and bring it up. If you look at the parliamentary debates, right from several years, you will see MPs raising issue after issue after issue, many ground issues, and it has to feed itself into policy making.
Absolutely.
So I cannot disagree.
Well, if you agree that
Yeah.
it is natural in a modern polity
Yeah.
for a significant percentage of people who will not be pleased and therefore they vote against you or vote the opposition.
Yeah.
Why is the PAP so concerned about the loss or the dilution in votes? If you accept that this is natural, it's going to happen, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are rejecting the government. People, I think a lot of people accept the government, respect the government, but why can't the PAP, for example, I'm just asking this question broadly, be more accepting that there would be an erosion of votes, not necessarily because they disagree with you?
Sure, there are two parts to your question. The first part is, if you know that people are going to disagree with you, then why are you concerned about erosion of support? I would put it the other way around. You never take anyone for granted. You go and fight for every vote and every opinion. Everyone is a Singaporean and you are the government of Singapore. If you are given the mandate to form the government, you govern for all Singaporeans, and I think you keep yourself on your toes by fighting for every vote and fighting for changing every opinion, convincing people.
I could jump in
Okay.
there.
2 quick points, then I have to go because people are falling asleep. Okay. Right, Paul
Ben
first.
first
and
and,
Yeah, you have to finish
okay,
my point.
okay. Finish your point, Ben.
Yeah, I think I'm going to first say that there are some amazing PAP MPs who have an amazing touch with the ground. And I think each election...
Only some.
Yeah, only
that's his point.
Is he seated next to you?
No,
One of
no
them?
one in Bishan Toa Payoh.
each election, you know
Are some of them in Bishan Toa
you
Payoh?
know who they are. You know who they are by the percentage of vote that they get. And I think at the end of the day, for me as well, for this election, the litmus test at the end of the day, whether or not it's us on the alternative voice side or PAP, the incumbents, how well an MP is received by his people in his constituency shows up in that vote. You know, and you know, I am more than happy, and all of us, as we go into this battle, to sit back and see at the end of the day what the votes are. If the votes ends up swinging a lot more towards the alternative voices at the end, or more towards the PAP at the end, I think that's a signal that we all come away and understand and take in the reality of what it is. So I think, first of all, there are MPs that do well on the ground, and then there are MPs that don't. And I don't think that is specific to a party or not a party. I think, as you rightly say, it's got to do with the nature of that person. It's got to do with how close he is to the ground. But I'll also say that
Hey, it's supposed to be a quick point, no?
yeah, this is my last
I
point.
still got my
here.
hand up.
Yeah, what we are hearing from the ground is something quite different from, especially in Bishan Toa Payoh, from perhaps what the PAP.
This is a plug
Team
for
says-
this candidacy.
We are not going to allow for campaigning,
Okay.
huh?
What we're hearing from the ground from residents in different parts of Singapore
Yeah, which
it
happens
seems
to be
to
the
be quite
center.
different from what the larger narrative is. And for us, I think we have the responsibility, and we'd love to have the responsibility, to bring the voices up and to say, okay, here's your chance to show through your vote where your choice lies.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, we respect that choice.
Good.
Okay, specific to general. Specifically, there was an answer to a parliamentary question raised by Gerald Giam, and the answer given by the health minister was the total national health expenditure in Singapore is $12 billion, of which government health expenditure is $4 billion. Now, here we're hearing, you're suggesting that it's actually gone up to $9 billion, and that is where the general point of this is that there's often a lack of information. You probably have information that we don't have. See, because we
I'll
depend
send it
on
to you.
the published, we depend on the published reports, the parliamentary questions, the reports in Hansard, and the very limited amount of data that's made available even to academics. So, as you know, for a long time we've asked for a Freedom
No, I
of
believe
Information
this
Act.
data is available, and I think you are taking the figures from 2011.
That's
My
right.
own understanding is that, given all the new packages that have been put in,
Right.
it cannot stay at 4 billion, obviously.
Yeah,
and it has
there was
moved up
the question
considerably.
was just asked in the last in the last session of Parliament, and the answer that was provided was based on, I think it was 2011 or 2013 data. but it was 4 billion out of 12 billion.
Yes.
The promise was made to increase it to 8 billion, but the total health expenditure is also increasing.
Yes.
So the proportion will still remain relatively close to
But
the
I
other.
was just saying 10 billion versus what's being
I think
spent.
it's a valid point about the importance of information.
Information, exactly.
And accurate and valid information coming to us.
Yeah, to the broader
if you want,
community.
If you want consultation.
Exactly.
Okay, with that, questions, comments from the floor? Anyone?
I have one.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yes.
To further the question about data being available, the fact that we need essentially what you just mentioned as well, the Freedom of
FOIA.
Information Act, the FOIA, because without that data, I as an individual, if I have the skill sets to be able to analyze, I have no means to do so because I don't have the data. Then I have to go by conjecture and hearsay and whatever else and some published reports, and I get to it. But that is a very critical aspect of us being informed and therefore be able to push what could be unpopular short-term policies for long-term good, because by looking at the data independently, I'm able to then make a informed decision whether I agree or disagree, instead of just blindly saying I don't agree with this, I don't want a short-term pain because I don't know what your long-term goal is.
So where the engagement becomes more meaningful.
It is extremely meaningful,
Right.
and that's what like Gini factors and all these things, they all harbor and they are built upon data.
Yeah.
And the data is clearly exclusive to one side. Not all of us. As a citizen, I want to know the data. It's not to put down anybody else, but I want to be able to know that my decision that I'm making is based on the actual raw data. As Shan was mentioning, let's talk by facts.
Okay.
That's where the
Good.
facts are.
Thanks. Yes, Wei-Ching.
Thank you very much for being here today. I think having a debate is great, as you pointed out at the beginning. I wanted to return to the question you raised at the start, which is, you said the Workers' Party, which is not present here, mentioned that their presence has encouraged more, diversity of opinion, and also possibly, we can argue about this improvement in some policies. One of the views, not just that they expressed, but some of my friends have also expressed, is that they feel that perhaps, we need to reach a certain number of members of parliament who are from different parties in order to have some sort of diversity of views. There was a number tabled recently that was 20, and I guess I'm curious, objectively speaking, if any of, all of you have a view on whether that's the right way to think about it, and whether there should be some sort of number that, citizens in our hearts should be aspiring towards. And a second related question, and, if you think this is a question that we should talk about later, feel free to push it to later. If all of you independently could advocate for just one form of reform in terms of political reform in Singapore in the next, 5-10 years, personally, what would you like that to be? Thank
Okay,
you.
let's hold the second question.
Sure.
I think it's an important question. We hold it for a bit later. Yes, Chandra?
Could I just come back to the aspect about the prioritizing and having the budget, the highest budget in defense, and then you talk about health. I want to be very idealistic and ask myself, why is it that we have to spend so much money as a nation on defense? And probably Malaysia and Indonesia and other countries asking the same questions. So I would like to go and be idealistic about it. And perhaps when we talk about having a Ministry of Defense, maybe we should think about on a regional basis, think about having Ministry of Peace. The mindset of human beings and politicians ought to give it a bit of a twist. The ministry, Minister here, Shanmugam, is Minister for Foreign Affairs. Ideally, perhaps the ministers should be talking about, because by having that, if ASEAN can succeed to a certain level, then the money that's to be spent on that, because we are fearful of our neighbors, and Malaysia will be saying, I'm fearful of Singapore and Indonesia is saying, I'm fearful of Malaysia and Singapore. That adds up to the budget being increased, spending on that. And at the end of the day, who benefits from that? Probably armament companies of, I don't want to name countries, maybe US or Israel or whatever,
Okay.
And what's it all for? So I think emphasis should be on the mindset should be changed, and all of us should be thinking along that line, and not just cutting down.
So really, I see two broad questions here, which I'd like the panelists to respond to. One is the question about information, accuracy, promptness of information, so that engagement can become a lot more meaningful. right? And more people will then want to get engaged as well. That's number one. Secondly, that this whole question of prioritization. Where should we put our effort, our resources? You know, should it be more in things that are going to promote collaboration or adversarial stance? I mean, that's the general sense I get from what you say. Wei Ching, your first question was on?
Numbers.
Yeah.
Numbers.
I'm using the question of numbers,
Numbers.
as a proxy for asking your question,
Yeah.
which is in terms of promoting our diversity
Yeah.
of views and improving our policies.
Right. So,
What should we be aspiring towards?
okay, good. Shanmugam, you want to respond to that first? Any, you can respond to any or
I'm
none.
happy to respond if you want me to respond first.
Yeah.
On defense, I take a slightly different view from Chandra. You know, history has shown that no small country of our size has lasted for a very long time. It wasn't too long ago that on the 9th of August, the Malaysians held an exercise where their troops attacked a location somewhere in Johor. It's an exercise. Every now and then, somebody will say, cut water. So in an ideal world, you don't need any defense expenditure. Neither the Americans, nor the Chinese, nor the Indians, nor the Japanese have to spend anything because you can all have peace. But in my own view, the best way to guarantee peace is to first make sure that you're able to defend yourself. But of course, that cannot be either the first or the primary way of conducting diplomacy. That is at the core. If things go against you, ultimately you're able to protect yourself. And everyone has got to know that if anything happens, then the result will be decisive, and decisively in one way. As long as you have that at the core, then you can build on it. For us, there are three aspects. At the core is the defense capability. Next, very importantly, is our regional engagement, the ASEAN platform. That is why in 1967, the 5 leaders, including Mr. Lee, said we should come together and have a platform that can bring the 5 countries together and talk about our issues. And that has expanded to 10. And now we bring in other countries on other platforms with ASEAN at the core. So that's very important for our security, for our defense, for our regional diplomacy and international diplomacy. And then at the third level, we reach out beyond the region and we play a very active role internationally. But ultimately, if people think that they can walk into your place and do what they like, then I think we would have done, we would have been highly and criminally irresponsible towards Singaporeans. The fact that everyone knows you invest in Singapore, you put $5 billion into Singapore, you create jobs in Singapore, Singapore is able to defend itself. And your investments are safe, but more important than that, Singapore's sovereignty is safe. We can call ourselves Singaporeans and look anyone in the eye and know that we are safe. And I think that you don't put a money value to. Yeah. And on the second question,
Sorry,
Wei Ching's-
before you go to that,
Yeah.
Anybody else wants to comment on this?
Sure.
This question?
Yes.
Quick one, please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so given that I've done my time in Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think I should say something. I totally understand the logic behind defense, and how we see it is that the whole question around defense spending is actually a result of the people feeling that there is a lack of effectiveness in the spending of other areas. That's making the people look at defense spending and saying, are we spending too much there? So I'd actually like to turn it around and say the whole question around the question of defense is around the effectiveness of healthcare, the effectiveness of social policies. And if we get those right, people will let us do and invest in the defense that we need. I mean, we've had years in our past where nobody ever questioned our defense budget, right? And life was
No, we've
was
always
good.
been questioned.
Not to the degree that it is now today.
Well,
So,
I
so
would
I'd say that
disagree.
maybe the discussion isn't around, and this is where I would differ, not disagree, but differ with my colleague here. I think the question isn't around the defense budget. The question is around the effectiveness of the other policies in the other areas. And if we get that right, I think the people will not look at the defense budget and say, why are we spending so much?
Okay.
Right. So that's my position on
All
that.
right. Thank
Okay,
you.
so again, I think the two are interlinked. You know, this whole question about the defense budget. Like I said, you know, some of my best times have been sitting there feeding mosquitoes at the wet gap in Seletar. That was most memorable. But in reality, what we're talking about is smart defense expenditure. And smart defense expenditure requires, Singapore is a very well-educated population. You know, we're able to handle debates. If the F-35 can be debated in Korea, it can be debated in Israel, there's no reason why the purchase of the S-35 cannot be debated in Singapore. So, and in fact, there are people who argue that the F-35 is a colossal waste of money because it's a plane which cannot fly or cannot shoot. So that kind of debate needs to be had in Singapore. There needs to be information. There needs to be information about how much we have invested in the F-35, about how effective it's going to be, what is the role of the F-35 in Singapore itself.
So that point leads us to a question by Harish.
Yes.
Which is about the suggestion here in that question is there's not enough information flow.
Yes.
You know, for engagement to be a lot more meaningful. How would you respond to that, Shamila?
Well, I would say in answer to Prof's point, there are 2 points which are being coalesced here. The larger issue is defense necessary? And it's being looked at by professionals, our military, with the proper Ministry of Defense. We assess these as necessary in protecting ourselves. And I looked at the manifesto, and you just say slash it by 40%. Without saying which parts you would cut, how would you cut, and simply saying smart defense doesn't really answer the question. But if I may move on, specific areas of debate, nothing is preventing people from saying, I disagree with this, and I think that sort of debate should be encouraged. If there are specific issues, or even broader issues, and if you say 40% of defense budget should be cut, I think we should debate it. Likewise, if there is any platform or weapon system that you think should not be taken up, there is nothing to prevent a debate on that taking place. And so in a sense, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to respond to.
No, actually, no.
I think there's a huge amount to prevent the debate from taking place.
There's plenty other issues we want to talk about. One moment, please.
Yeah.
I'd like us to move on
Sure.
from the debate on defense. I think
Right.
we've spoken enough about that. But can we now respond to the question about information flow? Is this question about information?
No, another question.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a while. Let's deal with this question of information flow. Because I've heard this mentioned several times in other forums as well. So I'd like a quick discussion on this. Is there or is there not sufficient information out there for us to have meaningful engagements?
Well, I would argue that the information is there. It's just not accessible to most of us. Like, for example, the Registry of Births and Deaths provides very comprehensive information, but it needs to be accessed, and very often it's difficult to try and get information out of government agencies. Like, for example, the average age of death that's published in the Registry of Births and Deaths in the most recent year for Singapore is 75 years. So, we need to find out from them whether this 75 years refers to Singapore residents, Singapore citizens and permanent residents, people living in Singapore. And it's often been very difficult to get clarity on a lot of these issues if you just go by the official published data.
Right. Eugene, you deal with a lot of information as a university lecturer. Do you have that problem?
I don't really think so. I find that, again, like Paul, I think there is a lot of information. I think the only difficulty is trying to access them. And of course, during my term as an NMP, I tried to ask for more information, particularly statistics, because I think they are useful. I think it enables them to be put on the public record. People will be able to assess them. So I think, yes, there's always the desire for more information, but I'm not sure whether this would be an issue in which Singaporeans are concerned about with regards to the general election, right? I for one welcome, as much information to be put out there, because I think the thinking of people is, we have to bear in mind, is that, well, if they find that information is not there, they tend to take a view that, well, maybe they're hiding something, right? But I mean, this is a common response, right? So, why are they not disclosing this information? And so I think it's something which perhaps is a civil service problem, right? Not so much, a political decision not to release the information. But I think, as a general policy, I think we should try to release as much information as possible. I'm not sure whether the Freedom of Information Act would be the silver bullet. But I think so long as we make that direction, and I think sometimes, if I can just quickly segue to the F-35 debate. I mean, I remember when the Minister of Defence raised that in Parliament, I was quite stunned because the decision has not been made, but he openly declared in Parliament that we were leaning towards the F-35, and I thought, that's not quite right. I mean, it just seemed to suggest whether, the process could have been better handled, because it seems to be saying, well, all the other companies can give up. We are leaning towards the F-35, and that would mean that where the manufacturer F-35 is concerned, they don't have to press the button any harder, because Singapore is a done deal for Singapore.
Yeah. So really, I think it's all linked. The larger point I'm hearing here is that we need engagement. The engagement needs to be meaningful, a lot more meaningful, can afford to be, and for that to happen, there needs to be freer, more accurate flow of information, right? Okay, Ting Yong.
I would like to ask a question, a more macro level type. We can go on discussing about health and defense and all, and I tend to agree with Eugene that we are not everyone can really understand and be able to contribute equally to that question. But I think for the election, for the electing MPs and the government, the most central question in most people's mind is, what kind of future can we look forward to? If you look at the last two elections, there are swings of 10% up and 10% down. And these are as a result of either external threat or internal concerns about lack of infrastructure and other concerns that people have about cost of living and all. So my question to the parties involved in the election is, what kind of social compact you think you can present to the people so that both the new voters and also the voters who have been around for some years, like myself, can see a brighter future ahead of us, rather than we have to leave something to the expert to do. Whoever you elect into parliament and they form the government, we obviously can give our inputs, but at the end of the day, we need to understand what kind of compact, what kind of picture our children were likely to see in 10, 20 years' time. So maybe that's something that I'd like to hear more of.
Is there anyone else who would like to add on to that train of thought? Yes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My question is not adding on to the same thought, but actually coming back to your original question, which I don't think has actually been addressed, which I thought was, to me, as a Singaporean, and I think from talking to many people, the issue when we go to vote this time, yes, part of it is, what is the social compact? What are the visions you have in mind for us? And to be perfectly honest, I think we all believe that the incumbent government's vision is the one that we, as a long-term policy, buy into. I don't think anybody is going to vote you out. But I think for the immediate election, the question that is uppermost in people's mind is not, is somebody else going to come in and have a social compact I'm not going to believe in, and therefore I better not vote them in. The bigger question is, the first question, do we need opposition in parliament? And have they done something for us? And that first question you asked, which was posed by Loh Thia Khiang, is, it is because of our presence that there have been changes. I appreciate statistics speak to some way in terms of answering questions, but I'm not sure those statistics answer that question. Let's take the simple example of MediShield that's coming up in November.
MediShield Life.
Yes, MediShield Life. Now, this whole set of statistics will not demonstrate that everything that has been done so far is, it shows that we have responded to that, and therefore this is evidence that we have addressed that issue. Actually, the fact is, all these stats talk about everything pre-MediShield Life. So then we come down to things like MediShield Life. Is it wrong what the Workers' Party claim, that it is actually our presence, the fact that some seats were lost, our presence in Parliament, that has caused the government to decide to look at these issues which we felt were not as important before. And I agree that very few people are going to argue with you about defense. But there are some issues that have been raised many times, but have not seen the light of day in terms of government focus on it. It seems to be that when more seats were lost than expected, especially at GRC, there was more of a focus on some of these bread and butter issues that were raised by opposition parties. The feeling amongst many Singaporeans just looking at those facts is it must surely be that they were raised and that a price was paid for not having addressed them before the last elections.
So we hear you, right? And I'll get the panel to respond.
Me try and respond to that.
But directly.
Well, I thought I answered it directly. You know, policies, I said, have to react to what, not just what people want, but also socio-economic changes and demographic challenges. It actually deals with both your question and that of the gentleman there. What are the real issues in this election? Today you have 4.8 persons working for every 1 person above 65. By 2030, that's going to go down to 2 persons under 65 for 1 person above 65. 900,000 people are going to be above the age of 65. You look at this demographic tsunami that's coming. Most governments in the world will not worry about 2030 because I won't be around in politics in 2030. If our concern is only to win these elections, we wouldn't worry about that. But if you worry about 2030, and if you worry about this, one of the fastest aging societies in the world, what would you do? You will put in place a healthcare system that takes care of that. That is the reality. And you will put in place a system where your senior citizens, because most of them are not covered by insurance, unlike many of us who are younger, in other countries, when they introduce healthcare insurance, they make your children pay for it. They consume first and your future generations pay. In our case, the entire premium was paid up front. You want to relate it back to 2011, I can't stop you. But I can tell you that you look at these 15-year, 20-year projections, what is happening to your society, and then you put in place the policies. Okay. 2007, 2009, 2010, you go back, you look, whole series of moves, which I don't like to use left and right terminology, but a whole series of moves, right up to 2010, 2011. 2010, you recall the scheme where companies were paid to keep Singaporean workers in jobs. No, not workfare. Jobs credit.
Jobs credit.
That is why our unemployment was low. $20 billion were put in. Now, you can go around in circles, but my point is, we look at the facts, we are data driven, these are the facts, we respond.
So in other words, I mean, what you're saying is...
I'm not saying 2011 didn't cause some changes, for example, on housing. I have to say there was a substantive feedback that a waiting time of 4 to 5 years, was not acceptable. And the waiting time now has been shortened substantially, so that 1.7 applicants. So there were some changes.
Yeah, so your point is that those changes were as a result of changed circumstances and feedback, and not so much the presence of opposition in Parliament. That's your point.
So since 2011, as a result of the feedback loop in the 2011 elections, there have been changes. I won't deny that. But I think the larger changes would be attributable to the demographic and socio-economic challenges.
That's your point of view.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I would challenge this as well. 2 points I'd like to make. The first point is that the Singapore healthcare system places a huge burden on the next generation. And the reason for this is that the bulk of older Singaporeans have very little in their MediSave, because most of them, when they were working pre-MediSave, or they have very low CPF contribution amounts. So who is paying the MediSave for them? It's their children. And this has become an intolerable burden for the so-called sandwich generation. You know, when we go on our house visits, we talk to people in their 30s and 40s. They are caught. They're paying high fees for childcare, for education, for tuition for their children, to ensure that their children get into the few good schools, because they don't believe that every school is a good school. And at the same time, they're paying for their parents' medical expenses. Their own Medisave is going into contributing
Paul,
the Medisave
the
costs.
the question here is
Right.
not so much that. I think you keep going to the healthcare. I'll give you a chance
Yeah.
later to go into that.
Yeah.
But right now, the question here is: has the presence of the opposition, a significant increase in the presence of the opposition in Parliament, has it made a difference?
Yeah.
And has it contributed to the change in policies that we have seen in the last 5 years? Shanmugam feels no, it's because of
Well,
the
he said
feedback.
a bit. He said a bit.
Yeah. No, yeah. But not significant
Right.
in your case.
Yeah, so
a quick response to
okay,
that
very
question.
quick. 2 points to that. First point is that again, it's Workers' Party's problem that they're not here. But Mr. Lau actually specifically gave examples of U-turns, where he says before 2011, the PAP had come out clearly and made statements that they were not going to do A, B, and C. And then after 2011,
I
they did.
disagree with that, by the way.
But
And
like I said, he's
on
not here.
foreign worker policy,
Yeah.
it is the Workers' Party which said we should go slow in terms of cutting back on foreign workers. And then within a year, when they saw the popular mood, they changed it and said zero growth. And then within a year again, they came back, and this is all in the Hansard, say, oh, you know, you should allow more foreign workers in specific sectors. You can't be a responsible government or a responsible opposition if you make U-turns like that and say whatever pleases the people
Okay.
for
Yeah,
6
well, like
months.
I said, he's not here, so I can't argue for that.
So
But-
he is the last one to talk about U-turns.
Sure.
yeah,
But let's hear what Paul
But
has
coming
to say.
back to this question,
I mean,
think
Paul can't represent the Workers'
no,
Party.
of course not.
Yeah. So
I'm
he
sure they
raised
don't
it.
want me to. But the question that was asked about what is the ideal number of opposition candidates, members of parliament, and I think I've made this point before. I think Dr. Chi made the quote. He quoted from Dr. Toh Chin Chai,
Yeah.
where he pointed out that probably the golden era of Singapore's policy, the era where HDB was established, where the JTC was established, was an era in which there was at least a third of parliament was made up of opposition members, or Singapore was actually, the PAP was in opposition in the Malaysian federal parliament. And that was a time when they had to prove that their policies worked because they were challenged. People would stand up and heckle them. You know, if those policies did not work, if they did not have a sound basis that could stand the test of parliamentary debate, those policies would never have made it. And those were the best policies that we've had.
Is that sort of presence of contrary views, is that necessarily?
I think that's critical. And again, I'm a scientist, you see,
Yeah.
and in the way scientific publishing works is a very bizarre one. You do your research, you submit it to a journal, it's actually evaluated by your bitter rivals.
Yeah,
And
your
if you
peers.
can convince your bitter rival that your work is good, sound, and solid, it gets published. You know, and that is the way science advances.
Yeah.
you see.
But is that, Eugene, do you have a view on this?
I do. I mean, I wrote a piece for in Today yesterday, talking about what I felt was a key issue in this general election, right? So there are two variables, right? Changes in government policy since 2011, and the largest number of opposition MPs. Voters, the sort of questions that are running through voters' mind now is whether the relationship between the two is a causal one, or just a mere correlation, right? And I think Minister has brought up many facts, but I think in the heat of the hustings,
Yes.
unfortunately, all these facts
Facts never win against logic, against emotion.
Yeah, feelings and all that, right? So I think it's something which voters will have to decide, and I think why the changes have been caused, at least in my view, is that yes, I think the larger opposition presence has contributed to that, because any government would be careful of not allowing the political support to erode further. But I think it's also because voters demand more. So in the 60s, that Paul talks about as the golden days, I think the electorate was very different, right? They weren't really in a position to articulate, their unhappiness about policy, or they're not able to come up with
They used to take to the
policy
streets.
or alternatives, or at least
Right.
the population was less educated. But I think now, you still need strong opposition parties, but I think governments and political parties, whether ruling or opposition, will have to take into account voters' expectations, voters' preference.
I need to go to Ben.
Yeah.
Ben?
Sure.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd answer those three questions all in a row. I think the people today do not, our sense of the voters, they are not out to sink the Singapore ship. They're not even out to sink the PAP ship. But we do sense that the voters today, this election is about finding those handful of credible alternative MPs that can get into Parliament. And I don't think those credible alternative MPs are about which party or who their other colleagues are, unfortunately, because we do have a GRC system. But if there are those credible ones that get in, who they feel have that compact with them, understand their heartbeat, know where they're coming from, and bring their voices into Parliament. And this is where I want to go back to my, if you give me a little bit of latitude, my helicopter analogy. Does the helicopter start from the ground and go up and then come back to the ground? Or does the helicopter start from the air, go down and go back to the air? And I think there is a difference between an MP, and the MP needs to swivel both sides. An MP that stands with his back, the people behind him facing the government, facing the Parliament, and speaking for the people, versus the MP that turns around and with his back, with the government behind him, facing the people and explaining to the people. And it's not an either or. I think it's both. But I think the people probably in this election want an MP that will face the government for them a lot more than to turn to them and explain government policies. Now, is that emotion? Is that rational? Is that based on facts and figures? I think the result of this election will tell, because that's where I think the rubber hits the road.
I think
my view of this election is the selection of that key group of alternative MPs that will go in. As to whether it's 20 or 1 or 2, I think it's not about the numbers, I think it's about the quality. And the quality doesn't have to be your wonderful policy formulator. It could be somebody like Mr. Cham who has a real heart on the ground, a real heart, a real feel. And you will have those alternative MPs that come in with a really good ground feel, and those who come in with good numbers and good facts and figures that are able to dialogue at policy formulation level. Yes. What is that mix? I think that's what this election is about.
And you feel that would contribute to better outcomes
in
terms of policies?
It holds the PAP or any ruling party more accountable.
Okay.
It, as you rightly say, makes the ruling party fight for the policy that they want to put across. And even if the debate ends up with the same policy being approved, it has gone through a debate. And I think that people want to see that.
So Shanmugam, your response is to this question that the opposition should have a stronger presence in Parliament so the PAP looks better.
I remember a debate.
Perform better.
I remember one of the by-elections. The Workers' Party said they want to be in Parliament to make the PAP work harder, and another opposition party said they wanted to be in Parliament to make the Workers' Party work harder.
So you guys are all on the same side.
Right.
Everybody wants to work harder.
Looks like the only people who are doing the work is the PAP. All the others are there to make us work harder. But anyway, coming back, I want to deal with 2 points. One, numbers, and the other, in terms of what Ben said. Most of what Ben says is really, no one can quibble with that. MPs are not seen as great policy formulators. You need people on the ground who understand your residents and who work with your residents, take their issues in Parliament, solve the ground problems, and at the same time, they also must understand government policies and explain it. So they need all those skill sets. I don't think there is any disagreement on that. And if we hadn't been doing it all this while, if our MPs haven't been raising it in Parliament, our MPs haven't been tackling the ministers, and our MPs haven't been listening to the ground, we won't be where we are. I mean, let's get that clear. I want to deal with the second point. Quality. I think here we are again talking in vacuum about numbers. The assumption is numbers alone are enough. I think Ben has got it right. You need credible people of integrity and character who will be able to take up issues in Parliament and when questioned answer in Parliament as well. And everyone knows what I'm referring to. When I asked Mr. Pratam Singh questions, he said, I won't answer to you in Parliament. It is the one place where they are in charge. When I asked him questions, he said, I won't answer to you, Minister. This isn't the answer. What about transparency? What about openness? Do you want 20 more MPs like that who say to you, I will answer to my residents, I will not answer the questions you ask in Parliament?
So at the end of the day, it is not just the numbers. I mean,
it is honesty and integrity.
And it's about the right quality of people. I think Singaporeans generally, the electorate, is looking for not just opposition for the sake of opposition, but people with quality. Okay, I need to
I think there's a lot of questions from the audience.
Yeah, I need to ask this question from, it's a text-based question. Let me go to this first and come back. This question is, there seems to be a trend, or at least it looks that way, that the government seems to brush away any alternative policies brought up by the opposition without giving any considerable thought. I mean, be it in Parliament or via other platforms. Can Sir Shanmugam, you're now Sir Shanmugam, explain if the government is ready to accept that good ideas can come from the opposition too, and are they willing to implement them, or is it the PAP's way or the highway? Thank you. This is the highest rated question so far.
Okay. The fact that we disagree with, say, for example, the STP's policy manifestos doesn't mean that it's only our way or the highway. I think many of you will remember what is our Singapore conversation involving 50,000 Singaporeans and going down to the ground, going issue by issue, taking the feedback. That's a massive exercise in understanding the aspirations of Singaporeans, what they want out of Singapore, and then trying to formulate policy along those lines. Look, if we were not responsive to what the people wanted, if we were not doing what was necessary for Singapore to survive and for Singaporeans to prosper, the country won't be here and the PAP won't be here. You win election after election by being responsive. So I certainly don't subscribe to that view. Good ideas can come from anywhere. What I disagree is that cutting 40% from our defense is not a good idea, and no amount of questioning is going to make me change my mind. Or imposing an additional corporate tax for the sake of other expenditure, or imposing luxury tax, this is not the way for us to go.
Okay. Yes, quick one.
Just a very quick one. You see, I think that we were talking about the DNA of the PAP. The DNA of the PAP is control. To a lot of people, the idea is control. That even in the conversation, you want to control who you invite. So this is remarkable. This is the third time there's been a debate that I've actually been involved with. Two of them have involved you. And the other one involved Prof. Tommy Koh, where Dr. Lam Pin Min actually came to Tembusu College just down the road to debate the healthcare policy. We have opened this invitation so many times, and it looks like unless you're Tommy Koh or Viswa, you'll never get a chance to debate.
You could have taken part in our Singapore conversation.
I tried. I wrote into the Ministry of Health, never got a reply. Every time I go up to the...
a lot of your members took part.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, I don't know why.
But they're not Paul Tambaya.
No, they're not.
Yeah. Right. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Praveen first.
Okay, so most of the discussion that has sort of focused around 2011 till now has sort of focused on how many opposition MPs we've had in Parliament, what is the better number to have. But I think what really has sort of caused a change is something that we regularly miss out when we talk about Singapore politics, and that is the political culture of this country. Right? There are issues of political culture and path dependency that must be addressed whenever we sort of try to access these pockets of information. And why this is important is, to a large extent, where we've gotten is very dependent on how we've gotten there. I hope that makes sense, because, like, for example, when we debate why do we come to a certain sort of policy decision, like, I agree with the minister that there is no chance that PAP would have executed a huge U-turn in terms of policies, because the government tends to plan in a set number of years, so that it's not possible to change. Similarly, the reason why it's important, I think, to have opposition in Parliament is not because of the number of MPs that they can have or the kind of questions they can ask, but because it changes the political culture of the country. Today we debate issues a lot more robustly than we do 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and the reason is because people suddenly feel that they can make a change. Yeah. They can contribute actively to debate.
So Praveen, your point, if I could just summarize, your point is that it is good to have opposition because of the chemistry. The chemistry changes, the political culture ought to change.
Because if we believe that Parliament is a microcosm of society, okay, then of course a change in Parliament will change society as well.
Right. Yes.
Sorry, can I just say something?
Yep.
I mean, just referring to the point that Shanmugam said just now, he said there's no way he will accept a 40% cut in defense spending. I think going back to the point that Paul was talking about, the PV is about control. I think that's the sort of a
I was
irritation.
speaking for myself. I mean, I'm entitled to express my view.
Of course,
that
of course.
I think
I'm
based
expressing
on
mine as well.
everything- Yeah, so it's not control. It's up to the population. If they
Yes.
believe that that's good, then they can
Yes,
go
but
down that route.
I think you agree that if I would just to take the layman's perspective, someone who's listening to you say that would have this sense that the PAP is really not open to any other ideas. I mean, sometimes
There
when
is
we're
a
talking about
difference between being open to ideas and disagreeing. What I'm saying is I disagree with it. Surely I'm entitled to disagree.
No,
Are you saying that I shouldn't
I agree
disagree?
that you can disagree.
And
Of
that's
course
all
you
that
can
I
do
was
that.
doing.
Yes, but if someone is interested to debate the point, why not just put it out in Parliament and debate it properly, right?
No,
So
but we are
why is it
debating
that
it
we
here.
can't have a talk about 40% cut? Maybe it's not 40%, maybe it's 30%.
No, we can.
So why is it that we can't have that? Why is it that we just say no? I think
I
just
don't
some time back
understand the
we were talking about people. The government was saying that we should just kill some sacred cows. It seems that we're putting back the sacred cows.
No, I
that's-
disagree with
Yeah,
that.
that's my perspective. That's all.
You see,
No, he's sharing his perspective.
He-
So I think we should.
but I think all I was doing is disagreeing with this idea, and I'm entitled to disagree just as Paul has disagreed with some of the things I've said. Surely that's each one's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we all know that government has moved to the left in its social policies. For example, we have the healthcare insurance benefits, the pioneer generation, moderating house prices, for example, less influx of foreign workers and talent, and more social outreach, social media outreach programs, as well as having a closer rapport with the residents of Singapore. Okay, against this backdrop, we have the spectre of MRT breakdowns. We have DBSS flats not being completely properly finished. Then we have higher living costs and so on. Overcrowding in trains, for example, by foreigners. How do you think your voters will look at these two aspects? Or how do you think they will shape up to this? Because
Okay. So let's take this question first, right? Very quick responses. I think we need to pick up the pace. Very quick responses, and then we address the other question. Yes. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. You're talking about breakdowns, DBSS, and crowding. See, this is where constantly looking at trade-offs. If you look at, for example, DBSS, what was the thinking behind it? It is actually not the HDB which builds the flats. It's a private developer, and the idea was to give greater latitude towards design, and the individual can choose to buy from the HDB or can go to a private developer and have this DBSS flats. But the government then falls between two stools in this, because in a sense it doesn't have control. I mean, it has sort of approval of plans, but it doesn't have control over the building, how it's built and so on, because it's a private development. But it takes on the responsibility. And people still say, oh, it's the government. The idea behind it was a good one, to give more flexibility, more creativity, different types of flats, and that cannot come from a centralized HDB building program. It's got to allow private developers to come in. And people, however, when they buy it, they knew they were buying it from a private developer, but from their perspective, the government is still responsible. So Minister Kaur has said, okay, we stop this program. We will build. If you want private developer, you go to a private developer direct and not via the HDB, which I think is the way he has decided. I don't have the time to go into detail on all the issues. I think people recognize that there are some economic imperatives. I gave you the demographics just now. To me, that is the most serious challenge Singapore faces, that 900,000 people are going to be crossing the age of 65, and that you're only going to have 2 people working, as in below 65, for every 1 person above 65, some of whom will continue working. How do you fund that? How do you deal with the healthcare challenges? Where are you going to get the manpower for your economy? Your labor force participation is going to go down to 20,000 within 5 years. How are you going to have an economy that is going to be able to sustain the kind of expenditure that we are going to face And with your economy, the factors of economic production, land, we don't have more. The capital, yes, we have more in productivity, but there is a limit to how much that can go up. For worker numbers, we are restricting it substantively. But when a foreign multinational comes to you and says, I will invest 5 billion and I'm going to create 5,000 jobs, 4,000 high-paying jobs in Singapore, but I'll need 1,000 foreigners. The dilemma is, do we say yes, do we say no? Land is not infinite. We need to take into account the social factors. Growth between 2003 and 2010, or 2008 anyway, was much faster than we had expected, because we thought after SARS and the 9/11, growth would actually be much lower. Do we catch the wind, get the growth in for the benefit of Singaporeans? Because all this expenditure that we're talking about comes from growth. So this is the dilemma. You have to have a country that's cohesive. People must be able to accept what is going on. And you also have to explain how any policy benefits Singaporeans primarily, even the immigration policy, and yet look at it long term. Okay. It is not easy.
All right.
Yeah, I think this kind of illustrates what we were talking about, and this whole issue of a diversity of views. And perhaps the closest illustration to this is from defense, but not in Singapore. I think many of you know that John F. Kennedy assembled a team which was called the best and the brightest. And they led the United States into the Vietnam War, which most people think was an unmitigated disaster, the way it was conducted and the way it was carried out. And the reason was that everybody had this one mindset, that you had this domino theory, and if you didn't stop them in Vietnam, they would come into Cambodia and Thailand and Malaysia and Singapore. So there was one mindset. It was argued by Harvard graduates, and they were very, very smart people, but they were wrong.
You think the domino theory was wrong?
It's obviously been proved wrong. I mean, we're not speaking Vietnamese today. Okay, so I think it's quite obvious that because the domino theory was wrong, because Vietnam had its own intentions in what it was going to do. I
disagree with that.
Yeah, you can disagree. That's fine.
Let him finish
so,
his point.
so the point I'm trying to make is that this government seems to have only one set of solutions. See, we have a problem of a declining birth rate. There are many reasons for a declining birth rate. There's issues of fertility, there's issues of environmental, there's medical issues, there's issues of stress, there's issues of housing. There's so many issues that come into this. But the solution seems to be to bring in immigrants. We have a problem with economic growth, the sustainability of economic growth. And as the minister has pointed out, from 2003 to 2008, there was a tremendous economic growth. But a large part of that was driven by a huge increase in the population. So this is the kind of thing that, we need to debate. We need to have more people ask really good questions in Parliament. We've had some very good questions coming out from the backbenchers and the 7 WP MPs in Parliament. But the question has to be, do you pursue growth for the sake of growth? What are the limits to growth? How sustainable is growth? Can the infrastructure cope with the growth? The health minister even pointed out, actually it wasn't health minister, one of the senior officials in Ministry of Health pointed out that the sudden increase in population put a huge strain on the healthcare system, and that's the reason why there's been a shortage of hospital beds and issues like that. And similarly with the MRT, one of the board members of the MRT said the MRT was an excellent system designed for 4.5 million people, and now we've got 5.5 million people. So it's obvious that you can't cope with that.
So your point is that, I mean, I believe many years ago it was George Yeo, when he was still in cabinet, many years ago, where he suggested that you need to inject impurities to get the right kind of chemical reaction. Right. And sometimes you need that.
Right.
And maybe opposition members are impurities. That
needed. I don't think that's the right way of
but I think the point is...
he's being provocative.
The point here is, it goes back to the question of political culture. You want to change the political culture, you want to get people a lot more engaged. The suggestion you're making is that you need this combustion. You need different ideas and different...
You need dissidents.
Can I say this, Paul? Can I say this?
Actually,
unfortunately,
Ben has been waiting for some time.
I know, but there's some factual inaccuracies.
We'll come to you in a while. Ben.
Sure. One of the things that I realized when I came out of the government and out of my policy formulation shell, and don't jump at me when I say that.
No, I don't jump at anyone.
Was that some of the issues that we face that other people outside of the frame have got a very different perspective and analysis and interpretation of the issues. And I think the fact that we have an aging population is something that private sector understands, the civic sector understands, us and the other alternative parties also understands. And it's rather than to say that we want combustive, combative ideas that come and test each other and we're coming into this angsty debate. Our party wants to say, can we put an issue that the country is facing and say, what are the different perspectives around this issue? How do we come together with a narrative that is shared? Right? And that narrative is shared because the people from different sectors of the community and of the political parties come together and dialogue and feel that their inputs, their perspectives have been taken in. And in the years, past 15 years that I've been working in the private sector, coaching Asia-Pac MNCs, a lot of them go down to their country GM, who's a local, and we teach them, we say, when you say something in your local country, GM says something else, we teach them to say, okay, stop and say, oh, why do you think that? What are some reasons that made you feel that a 40% cut would be meaningful? And that openness to listen and then to realize, oh, there's a different way that we could look at this. And it doesn't mean different means I'm wrong and you're right, but it adds to a different color, tenor, and then we look at that problem and say, now we share a common definition of this problem, and then now let's problem solve together. And that's a very different way of problem solving and of policy formulation when the government comes up with a policy and then explains it and defends it and fights for it, and then, as you rightly say, pick out what's good and puts it into it.
So the benefit of different perspectives.
We're moving upstream in the policy forming process and putting it out there a lot earlier, I think, and that's important.
Okay, Shamukha.
I think when Paul said, talked about our birth rate, I'm sure you know that across East Asia, whether it's Taipei or Seoul or Hong Kong, the birth rates are either worse than us or at about our rates. So it's not specific to Singapore. Even Shanghai, China is a relatively developing country.
One-child policy, though.
Well, Shanghai now, currently, the birth rates are at about, much less than 2. So it's something that I think is East Asia. It's very obvious, particularly in the urban context, and so to say that there is only one way of solving it, first you've got to recognize that it is a problem that many societies face, and no one has really dealt with it effectively, whether in Japan or anywhere else. And second, there are the Nordic countries, and there is their experience.
They're pretty successful.
But, relatively successful, but at a considerable cost, and then you got to ask yourself whether our economy can sustain that. And don't forget, about 40 to 50% of babies born in the Nordic countries are born out of wedlock, and whether that's a solution for us. I don't think our society is looking at that sort of solution. Second, in terms of saying we are seeking to solve the demographic problem by immigration, nothing of the sort. I mean, you're getting about 25,000 new citizens a year, and that's not going to really change your demographics. It is very, very, and these are all published figures.
Right, but that's almost as many as the number of births.
No, wait, 25,000 new citizens coming in.
Births.
Yeah, but you go and look at the TFR, and you go and look at the old age support ratio, it hardly moves the needle. And if you don't do that, you will be in a far worse position. The real problem, and you talk about controlling immigration, we have tightened up the foreign labor growth so much. I said just now 70% of Singaporeans are employed by SMEs. Those SMEs are the ones who are suffering the most. And if they close down, you hurt Singaporeans. And I want with this question to ask of you. We are a free port. We establish ourselves as a free port, trading nation, one of the most successful trading nations in the world. So many of our jobs are dependent on our shipping and aviation status. Why are you against the free trade?
We're not against free trade.
TPP.
I never said I was against free trade.
You are opposing
TPP.
TPP.
Is not about free trade. It's an issue of transparency. See, the TPP documents have been shrouded in secrecy. It took Julian Assange to actually hack into the system to get bits and pieces of TPP
are you for
released.
TPP or are you against TPP?
It would help if we knew the details of TPP. And from my point of view,
So, but can I take it that you're not against TPP?
Oh, in terms of pharmaceutical industry, the permanent patent protection for life-saving drugs, I'm dead set against the TPP's pharmaceutical provisions.
Look, you can't pick and choose. So I'll take it that your position is you are against the TPP.
No, you cannot take one whole lump sum. It's like, are you saying, are you against water and fresh air? You know, because if I'm against an important provision in the TPP, as I said, if the whole TPP document was made available to people all over the world and did not depend on WikiLeaks revealing selected portions of the TPP, we would have a greater debate. We would have a much better debate. And it's not just Singapore. You know, the US has been terribly secretive about TPP.
People
are very, very unhappy about that.
Well, the left wing of the Democratic Party is against it.
But I think any physician worth his salt who worries about treatment of cancer drugs, you know, the cost of drugs that are used.
Okay.
But universal health care, that's a separate point.
Sure. As a moderator, I think a lot of the audience out there will be lost. Let's not deep dive into. Can I urge that we don't deep dive into specific issues? I think the point is generally made. Right. I'd like to now move on. I'll come back to some of you with your questions. I'd like to move on and shift gears and ask a few slightly different questions. What sort of qualities are we looking for in the people we want to vote in this election? Right. Now, let me start by asking this question. A lot of questions have been raised in Parliament, Shanmugam, about MPs not having integrity. In particular, this was directed at the AHPETC issue, Workers' Party. There are many people out there who feel that the PAP has adopted a bullying tactics, sledgehammer, minister after minister coming out to wreck the Workers' Party, right? And the Workers' Party has had many challenges in taking over. These were the points that they've raised. And in the last forum that I chaired at the NUSS, when this question was put to Gerald Giam, why is it that, I think it was Sim Ann, who was on the panel representing the PAP, she asked, she said that the PAP was frustrated, that the Workers' Party was not forthcoming with the explanations. And his response, and I quote, was, "We explained every point that has been brought up, which demands an explanation." You know, now I'd like your response. What is it that you saw as the issue, you meaning the PAP, in this entire matter? If the Workers' Party claims that they have come clean, it's a pity now that we don't have the Workers' Party, but if the Workers' Party did say, time and time again, Sylvia in particular, that they have said whatever they have to say, and the matter was brought up to the High Court. If all these things have happened, why is the PAP still harping on this issue?
You mentioned the High Court, so let's not talk about what I say or the government says. Let's just look at what the High Court said. The High Court said that Ms. Lim misled Parliament. The High Court said that the conduct of the Workers' Party was a height of financial irresponsibility. I'm quoting, by the way. The High Court said that it was a travesty for the Town Council to have ignored their duties and obligations, and that there were numerous breaches. The High Court also said that if this conduct had been done in a company, it may attract civil, even criminal action. And there were grave and serious questions regarding the validity and propriety of payments made by EPTAC to related parties in excess of $25 million. And what did their auditors say? Their auditors said, their own auditors, Foucault and Tan, said the Workers' Party was refusing to give them documents and information relating to these very transactions. So you won't answer to your auditors. And I quote to you what the Auditor General's report says. The Town Council, despite repeated requests, did not provide us with all the critical documents relating to these transactions, the very transactions which were highly criticized by the High Court. So they say the answer, but each time you ask them, in Parliament, what did they say? Ms. Lim said to me, my other MPs will answer. That was her answer. And Mr. Pritam Singh said, Minister, I will not answer your questions. I will answer to my residents. Mr. Gerald Giam says to you, oh, we have answered whatever needs to be answered. What was their final point? We will answer at the rallies, in the one forum where they cannot be asked questions. That's where they will answer.
So,
and wait, let me finish. The point is not a question of bullying or not bullying. We have succeeded in Singapore by making sure that public institutions and public funds have been treated properly with integrity, and I think those standards, financial rectitude, integrity, honesty, incorruptibility, these are the virtues, values that I'm sure Paul will agree with, Ben will agree with, and Eugene will agree with, and I'm sure even you will agree with, which have brought us here. And my point is, these are monies. Last Saturday, Ms. Lim issued a statement saying there has been no overpayment. This is in response to newspaper articles which showed that their
FMSS.
friends made $3 million in profits in 1 year, a husband and wife team. And she said, well, that's fair, and there was no overpayment. Unbeknown to all of us, at the very moment, for a few weeks, they have been trying to claw back $450,000 and also holding back another $3.2 million. So if there was no overpayment, and if everything was fair and according to contract as she claims, then why hold these monies back? No answer in the rallies, no answer anywhere. Basically, if you have all these things happening, financial issues, serious issues, do you keep quiet? Is it bullying to raise it and ask for answers? All we want are answers.
Eugene?
I think the unfortunate thing is, the AHPTC has become conflated with, not say conflated, but I think people are lost in all the minutiae. Unfortunately, I think, again, the electorate either doesn't have the bandwidth or doesn't want to follow the very close discussions that have been raised and
there are different versions
in the High Court judgment.
Different
Yeah. So there are competing.
We're talking about the High Court version.
There are competing narratives, right? So the government says one thing, the opposition says, the Workers' Party says another thing, and I think I'm just concerned that this election could just be reduced to 6 letters, right? AHPTC, and I think there are bigger issues that we can go to, and I think the government has put its point across, and I think it should trust the wisdom of the voters,
Yes.
to decide, how they want to deal with the issue.
Yeah.
Well, if they say things in the rallies which are not true, which they said last night, we are not in jail, but there are a lot of things that you can do without being in jail, including misleading Parliament. And so we have to respond.
I don't think you can get away with misleading Parliament, because I think there's a Parliamentary Privileges Committee.
Well, you could have formed a Parliamentary Privileges Committee and charged, but we didn't do that. But I'm just telling you what the High Court said.
Right.
No, I think,
and you would, I'm sure you would say integrity is important.
Of course.
Thank you.
So the issue, the point that I want to raise here is that the concern that the PAP appears to have here is issue of integrity. It's not the technicality.
I think it's
issue of integrity.
It's again the control issue. It's the DNA. You see, integrity seems to apply to AHPTC, but not necessarily to the PA. And that is what a lot of people online and a lot of people are raising questions about.
What do you mean by that? Because in the PA's case, the man was asked to step aside.
Right.
There was a full investigation.
Right.
And it was found that there was no loss of any funds. Right. And at the same time, the reason why he did it is because, look, on the ground, he needed to pay immediately.
$56,000 for a bonding trip for himself and his
there was investigations, and if you want to challenge that, that's a separate point.
No, I don't.
But and at the same time, in other instances, when the AGO report pointed out some wrongdoing, that there are criminal proceedings afoot.
Right.
So this is not a government that will say we hide this. If there is corruption or there is wrongdoing at any level, we will go after them.
Okay.
So NLB, you know what happened.
Right.
I think we have to
Yeah.
allow Paul to finish his point.
Yeah. Now, my point is that to somebody who's not a legal expert like yourself, see, what we see is in the PA's case, there was an act which was committed, you know, the authorization and things like that, but it was investigated by the PA, and they were allowed to take the action that they felt internally. Whereas in this case, you know, to the layman who again doesn't understand all of the legal minutiae, the question is, why is the PAP hammering at the same issue? And I think that what the WP has done is they decided to send the same team in. So ultimately, as Eugene said, they're going to let the voters decide. And the voters will decide whether they are satisfied with the explanation given by the Workers' Party team, or whether the PAP has managed to convince them otherwise.
Well, do you think it is okay? I mean, you will be satisfied if a high court were to say somebody has acted in these ways?
No, of course not. But I mean,
Okay,
the point is that I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know what are the implications of the High Court judgment.
What
My
are the implications
understanding
of the
was that
High Court saying that it
the High
was
Court threw out
misled?
the case.
High
To a layman, you know, my take is that the judge made a lot of statements,
Paul,
and then he
you
threw out
are
the
a very
case.
smart person.
I'm not
when
a
the
lawyer.
High Court, when the High Court says this is the height of financial irresponsibility, it was terrible the way they conducted
Yeah, but
themselves.
to
Let
my
me
mind-
finish. Let me finish.
Yes, right.
And
But you have to let him finish as well.
and that all of this included misleading of Parliament. You wouldn't be concerned?
No, I would be very concerned if
Yes.
the PAP government felt that all these terrible things were happening and then they decided not to take any action. I
Right.
would be very concerned about that.
And
Okay, sorry, Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I totally
helicopter
agree.
again? No.
No. I totally agree with Eugene. I totally agree with Eugene. I think if this election continues to be around those 6 letters, then perhaps the PAP might not have the opportunity to listen to what else the voters are saying, what other concerns that the voters feel that this election is about. And I think the election is not about how the PAP defines the election issue for the people. The election is about the issues that the people, the voters on the ground feel is what they want to vote their MP for. And I would agree with Eugene. I think the point has been made. The information is out there. I don't want to get drawn into this situation because I'm not involved with this at all. But I do feel that for both sides, both the Workers' Party and for the PAP, it would be good to listen and say what are the other issues that the people on the ground are trying
look
to say.
at our manifesto and PM speeches.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the time, we've been focusing on our agenda and what we think are the issues. But
Yeah.
when people raise these points, we need to respond.
Absolutely. And so I think we need to, I would also recommend greater airtime, more airtime for the other issues as well.
Okay, audience, comments. Agnes, you want to go first? There's a mic next to you. Okay, link to this idea,
Yeah,
please.
I think it's linked to this.
Yes.
On the question of honesty, integrity, and trust, and so on, can I suggest to the minister, because you are the government and you're going to form the next government anyway,
Never take anything for granted.
I mean, certainly. I mean, you'll be the next
Yeah.
government. There's no doubt about it. Can the AGO not, instead of auditing only the town council accounts, and then separately the town council of the HPTC, can't they appoint a panel of independent auditors or accountants to audit all the town councils globally? In other words, not only the PAP town councils, but also the opposition town councils. In that way, I think perhaps we'll have less of these kind of arguments, less things, accusations and things like that going around here and there.
Well, you
Let
know,
me-
the point is, the accountants appointed by the town council have to be approved by the MND. So they wanted to appoint Fukon in town. Fine, you know, we had no problems with that. The problem is that in each of those years that they produced accounts, they were always qualified, and you know what qualified accounts means. Auditors were unable to form a clear view because they were, and the nature of the qualification was very worrying because the auditors were saying these people are holding back documents from us on related party transactions. That is when it involved a very substantial sum of money, that the Auditor General went in. Every PAP town council also has certified auditors. If these sorts of things happen in a PAP town council, you would expect the MPs to resign. So the only town council with such accounts in the history of town councils in the last 30 years is AHPTC. And that's why you have all these problems. If they had a clean set of accounts, nobody would be asking any questions, and their own auditors wouldn't pass their accounts. That is the problem.
Okay. Harish?
Mine is related more to the TPP question more than anything else. It is concerning to me because TPP, I know there is not enough information there, and Vishwa, as you said, most people will be drawing a blank as to what TPP is, and that is where the problem is. There is a bunch of these negotiations that's going on across many countries in this part of the world that is looking to restrict all kinds of stuff. We are all conjecturing because we have no idea what's going on. And from a person from the industry looking at it, there are significant things that we think is going to be an issue. And as the WikiLeaks have suggested and said, there are all kinds of restrictions that we will be faced with. We have no idea about the truth behind it. The fact that it is completely secret is the biggest issue. There is no transparency. And the fact that Singapore was mentioned many, many times in that TPP negotiations that are still ongoing is worrying for me. And there is no clarity, no answer. Anytime this has been raised, it's always been said, it's still ongoing, it is a secret. So to me, that's a big issue that needs to be addressed because it's going to affect us from a long-term perspective. It's not a medium-term perspective, from a long-term perspective.
Anybody wants to respond to this?
We were one of the 4 original parties which started the negotiations, which are now called the TPP. Ourselves and 3 other countries. No one had any problems with that. You are now negotiating an agreement, and remember, we are completely investment-driven, open economy. Your jobs are dependent on international trade flows and international investment flows. You are having a trading regime involving the world's largest and wealthiest country, the 3rd largest economy in the world, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, potentially Malaysia, Vietnam, and you want to be out of that? Does it even make sense? Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's the only view. I'm simply expressing my view. And my view is that you, the 14th largest trader in the world, with an external economy that's 4 times the size of your GDP, are not part of this regime. You are looking at seriously risking a lot of jobs. It is in our interest to negotiate a deal that doesn't affect our core interests. And why would our government do that? But at the same time, when you're sitting at the table, every government has got to give in something and take something. Because it's not a case of everybody, it's a case of negotiations. You have to negotiate with multilaterally. You give some, I give some. At the end, I must make sure that my core interests are protected. The Japanese will have to look at the agriculture sector, which is a huge issue for them. So every country will have to look at something, but we are one of the most open trading regimes in the world. And for us to be against TPP, I say this on the record, I think will be extremely damaging to us and our jobs. And up to now, and that is why I wanted to know whether he seriously objected to the TPP, and he says yes. We are a free port, free trade society, and you don't want to be part of this trading regime?
I think the problem is not so much not being part of the trading regime. The problem is we don't know what this treaty is all about. So
that's
until
exactly
we know,
the point.
Then I can say whether I agree or disagree.
The
right
negotiations at this stage, as you are negotiating with so many countries involved, when each one is negotiating and giving up something or not giving up something, obviously they will not want the details to be public because we may be able to carry the ground, but they may not be able to persuade their parties immediately because there will be vested interests which immediately oppose any kind of trade-offs. And in the US, there are lobby groups. Even a minority interest can then try and block it on the basis that this is damaging to their particular sector. And so the negotiation, you have to elect people, you have to get experts in, and you got to trust them to do the best for your country and for each country. And then you got to sit around the table and negotiate. If each time you negotiate and the US is giving up something, or Japan is giving up something, or Australia is giving up something, it comes out. And if they cannot carry, you don't do negotiations in that way. You do it in that way, you will not get a treaty.
Okay, so I guess what we're hearing is the government, from the government's point of view, in any negotiation, there has to be a certain level of confidentiality until it comes out. That's very clear. Not only the Singapore government, in any country, that's how it's done. But from the people's point of view, what you're saying is you're a stakeholder, right? If I hear you right, you're a stakeholder. It affects your business, your stakes are high. You would like to be part of the conversation at some level, right? And I believe that was what you were trying to say
just now. That's precisely the point. You see, this is not an exclusively Singaporean problem. This is a problem that is faced in all the countries who are negotiating the TPP. Because this affects the livelihoods of individuals, it affects farmers in different parts of the world, it affects professionals in many parts of the world, and of course it affects patients who have access to essential drugs. And that has been a critical issue with a lot of these trade negotiations.
Okay. We need to wrap up we've got 10 minutes left, so I'd like to ask one final round of questions before we wrap. Yes, Eugene, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think we can understand the strategic considerations, but I think the concern has been raised by the different stakeholders is what about their interests, right? Because everything is put at the altar of national interests. I think at some point, yes, that needs to be done, but can the stakeholders be assured, that there could be mitigation done, for stakeholders that are negatively affected in the greater national interest?
Right. So at the end of the day, I guess it goes back to the original point that we need a lot more, we would like, where possible, a lot more consultation on issues that are of direct significance to our lives, right? May not be so much in the area of defense, but in many other areas like economics, jobs, it affects us. So stakeholders want to. And that sort of engagement is what's meaningful, but that to happen, we need a lot more information, right? And accurate information. So I'd like to wrap this discussion by asking all of you one broad question. Or two questions actually under one broad heading. Right? First question is, what would you like to see? What are the qualities you'd like to see in the kind of leaders, MPs or potential office bearers? As PM said, there's a potential future Prime Minister in this election coming up. What are the principal qualities you'd like to see in this individual? Fielded by the PAP. Similarly, what are the principal qualities you'd like to see in the candidates fielded by the opposition parties if it's different? Are we looking at different types of qualities? And if so, what are these qualities? Could I have a quick sense on the ground of what are these fundamental qualities? A quick sense, keep it short, right? Arasha. Can we pass the microphone? Yeah.
I would like intelligence, because not everybody is the same in Singapore. Some people do have content and research and this and that. So definitely intelligence, unshakable integrity, and compassion.
What does unshakable integrity mean?
It means doing the right thing and being transparent when something goes wrong, being real. So it doesn't matter who did something wrong. We are all humans, we make mistakes, but the integrity is unshakable. We are known to be a clean country in more ways than one. Our brand, the Singapore brand, we have risen up right to the top. Every time you mention the Singapore brand, people say it's a great country. Now that's not bad. It's because we have integrity. We are known to be hardworking people, but we are not known to be corrupted. So if there's any issue of wrongdoing by the members of parliament, by the alternative parties, we need to have integrity.
It's about owning up.
Absolutely, we have to be honest. Because this is how the citizens have always stood by the right people.
And would this apply equally whether you're PAP or opposition parties?
Okay. It must.
You put it in a certain order.
Yeah.
Intelligence, integrity, and then compassion.
Yeah, well, let me explain why. First and foremost, maybe compassion should be the first, because that's I think, So
Yeah, because I saw you as quite a compassionate kind of person.
yeah.
So
But that's not
third,
in the
so that's
government's-
third. So now you're saying that's number one for you.
No, it's number one, compassion, regardless, because you will do the right thing if it's the best for the country. Because you care about everybody in the country, not just certain special interests. That's what I mean by compassion. And it's not about populist. I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of rudeness that I see on social media. I think it debases the beauty of what we've created as a country. And being rude, it's just not nice for us to do.
You can disagree.
Yeah, of
but
course.
it doesn't mean
but
that
don't be
you-
rude, you know.
Right.
And it's always easy to be popular, but it's not easy to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So I would like a government, MPs, whoever that wants to help Singaporeans, you got to do the right thing.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Thanks.
So yeah, this
Let's hear from those who we haven't heard from. If there's anyone who hasn't spoken so far. Agnes, yeah, here please.
Sorry, thanks.
If you're asking on that point, for me, the most important is the political will to be incorruptible. Because I've lived in many different countries where I've seen how corruption is a cancer. It really is a cancer that destroys the country, and there will be no equality for the people if there is corruption. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I think that's the most important factor
Yeah.
for
Now,
an MP.
how would you like to be able to assess people in the 9 days of hustings? Better assess.
This is a difficult question because unfortunately everybody will just want to portray their best side. And
No, because I don't think anyone here would disagree with what you've just said. The problem and the challenge is, how do we tell the wood for the trees? How do we tell a charlatan from someone who's actually
Unless they
who
have a
actually
track
means?
record.
Yeah. So how do you?
So some
do you,
of us do.
But there are some. I mean, even PAP.
Or if they're transparent and open the books to let people see and have information freely available.
Is there enough of that happening?
the
Transparency,
Yes.
track record, putting the cards on the table, saying this is who I am.
track record is a good way to gauge, but to be fair to new
Yeah.
MPs, even from
PAP.
PAP, they are new. Where is the track record? So that's the difficulty. I'll pass
But
it
you
on.
do see the need and importance in elections
It's very,
for
very
there to be a
important.
lot more of transparency. right?
Transparency, definitely.
Yes, Jared. Behind.
Thank you. As a first-time voter, and I think I'm the youngest Singaporean sitting in the audience. I think what I really want
You
to
don't
see.
have to apologize for it.
Oh no, I'm not
He's proud of
apologizing.
it. He's proud of it.
That's my yeah. I think what I want to see from the candidates, whether it's the MP or potential office holders, on both sides of the aisle, is a vision for Singapore. I think sometimes that is a bit that's not really articulated well. I think when parties go down to the issues, I think during the debate itself, when you go down to technicalities, you lose the voters' interest, you lose really what people are looking out for, which is what this election is about. It's a mandate for the political parties to move forward and govern over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And so I think that parties should use the rest of the campaign, however short it is, to really articulate their vision and what they see Singapore to be and what they want Singapore to become.
And what is it that you'd want to discern from the way and what they say? Whether
Sorry,
it strikes a chord with you, I mean, what is it you want to hear? What is it you want to know?
Right. Well, for me personally, I tried raising that question just now. One of the issues that was brought up was the issue of social mobility, but that's always been looked at from an income disparity point of view now. What I'm concerned as a younger Singaporean, I mean, having made through the system myself, about for those who haven't made it through the system, right? So how would education reform be changed to meet the needs of the future, especially for those Singaporeans who are not academically inclined? How would the education system be reformed to meet their needs in a very globalized world? And I think not enough parties are talking about the future. It's all about the next 5 years, and that's why I like to see a vision for Singapore 20 years down the road.
Okay, excellent points. Maybe I get the panel to have a quick response and then we go back to one more round of comments.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent point, brilliant point. I'm glad you mentioned it because the future of Singapore depends on getting that right. And I would say making our model work better the system can do so much. The part of the issue is middle class parents can give a lot of advantages to their children, which, however good your system is, you cannot completely equalize. So we got to see, we have to put in a lot of effort into preschool, and not everyone we must look at it as not everyone has got to go only down one track. Skills Future, look at Germany, look at Switzerland. Our people must be able to go into ITs and polytechnics and come back with skills. And the government under Skills Future will pay the companies to take internships from students in ITs and polytechnics so that they come back out with well-paying jobs, which would give them a better and secure future. This is absolutely essential. When we talk about current issues, when we talk about integrity and so on, we also need to talk about a vision for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. What is Singapore going to be like? And in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of economy, what is the future for Singapore and a quality of life? The big things. Right. I absolutely agree.
Okay. SDP and then SPP, yeah? SDP obviously has a point of view on issues of education, meritocracy. You guys have commented on it. What's your sense of this? Let's keep it focused on this issue.
It's very simple. People always ask me, why did you join the SDP of all parties? Because I'm an academic, I'm fairly comfortable in my profession, in academia. And I tell them the reason is because SDP is a very clear-cut philosophy. It's maybe a philosophy that you disagree with, but it's fundamentally a belief in building a democratic society based on justice and equality. See, equality is fundamental. Equality across the board, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're sick or healthy. Justice, which means that we ensure that there's a level playing field. Regardless of your background, that people are brought up to a certain level, that you do not have to depend on the state for handouts. In fact, we believe that there should be a minimum wage, there should be all those other things, so that you do not need to depend on all those many helping hands and all those things like that. And at the fundamental core of this is democracy, which is that every citizen has a voice. You may not be as educated as some of the people here in the university, but your views are equally valid. And it's just that they need to be channeled, or they need to be heard in a manner in which they can be respected, and it's all a question about respect. So you respect for every individual, not necessarily the aristocrats, so to speak, but the people, the voice of the people. And I think, that's my vision for the future. In 20 or 30 years' time, there'll be no more fear in Singapore, that university students will come from all walks of life, that we won't have to worry about healthcare. That there's so many other things. It's kind of utopian in a way, but that's sort of like that's what drives people with that kind of philosophy.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
I'm going to say I think it's a fallacy to want each alternative party to come up with a vision for Singapore's future that's different from the others. I think we all believe that we want Singapore to be successful. We want our people to get good jobs. We share a common vision for what Singapore is. I think where it differs for us at SPP, DPP, is how we get there. And we've said many times in our manifestos that we actually fundamentally believe in a collective, collaborative government that can bring the best of people from across political parties together to co-define problems and co-create answers so that the community owns the solutions themselves, and that they feel that the answers are not told to them, but they feel the answers come from them. And I think there's a difference also. Another thing I would say about the future is that we'd love to have a future where the voter not only is told that he is heard, that the voter feels that he is being heard. And that's a challenge for all of us. It's not just for any one party. So that, I think, is our vision, how we get there. And I think that process being different, collective, collaborative, will lead to much better answers, much better quality solutions that we're trying to grapple today. So that's my answer.
Okay. Few last round of comments about what you're looking for in those in the candidates who are standing for this election. Now we can go to people who have already spoken. Yes?
I absolutely agree with all the points that have been raised. I guess just one other thought. I also wonder if diversity of background might also be something we can consider. And that doesn't necessarily mean party lines only, right? It also means, in terms of what part of society might you have been raised in, what kinds of education had you gone through, what kind of personal experiences that you've been through, because that could also shape people's interests, experiences, judgments, and so forth. So I absolutely agree with all that's been said, but I just add that as a possible point for consideration. Yeah.
Yes, Harish.
If I were to add one word, which is empathy, to be able to be empathetic, to have that is, I think, a very, very important thing. And I sense that is unfortunately not sufficiently clear or coming through with any of the, a lot of the candidates that I've, heard.
Why is it not coming through for you?
I don't know. It just doesn't feel that's part of their DNA. It could also be because, the limited exposure that they have in communicating to all of us is where the problem is. Because I don't know you yet. So until I know you, how am I supposed to even understand where your empathy lies? And so that's a real problem as well.
Actually, it's an important point, and I hope at some point the panel can respond to that. How do we find out? Because I've been hearing this quite a bit, not only in this forum, but we want people who care. We want people who are authentic. But how do you show that? How can you discern that? Any thoughts on that? I mean, how would you like it to be seen, to be shown?
I would like.
Yes.
I've always had this wish. Sorry.
No,
I've always had this wish for our those who are whether they're in government or running for an office, to dress down in ordinary clothes, go into disguise, and live a couple of weeks as an ordinary Singaporean. Then you would understand how crazy things are on the ground. I mean, I have seen the difference over the last 6 years. The pace of a society has, it's mad. I mean, literally as well. More people are a bit mental these days. I come across a lot, and
people on the trains don't smile. I mean, it's a fact. It's a fact.
We try, and when they smile, you get a bit concerned.
Yeah.
You look behind it. No, but my point is, I mean, on a serious note, I think if our leaders and those who wish to be our leaders can live a couple of weeks as an ordinary Singaporean, you would understand what makes us frustrated, sad, disconnected. Like what are they talking about? You know, making Singapore the top of something. Hello, I'm worrying about my bills this month, and I'm not even a low income person. I'm a graduate. Society has changed.
Yeah.
So if our leaders must feel what we feel, then you know what we mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. Mm-hmm. There's a live phone call coming in, and let's take that. This person. Yes. Can we have the? Can we? Yeah.
Stand by.
Okay.
Minister, I really worry about the feel on the ground.
Oh, we can't hear me.
I think in my Pasir Ris constituency, there appears to be a very sour mood, which I think goes along Singapore many times. Despite all the SG20 goodies thrown in, people are not too happy. My question to you, why, how, when are the causes for a not so rousing mood in the heartlands? And will this cause an erosion in the votes come September 11?
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What's your name, by the way?
Raymond Raj from Pasir Ris Street 12.
Okay. What's your IC number? Okay. You stay online, Raymond. Stay online because it resonates with what some of the points that were raised here. So what are some of the concerns that people have on the ground? Maybe we can all respond to that. Yeah.
You see, in all of this, one shouldn't be defensive and one should be accepting of what's happening. But I do want to say there are some people who say there are these issues, and you drill down and you try and deal with it. And I think empathy, as Harish mentioned, is important. Where is the majority opinion? Is it positive or not so positive? I think there are different viewpoints. By and large, from what I hear about Pasir Ris, most people are extremely supportive of what has happened on the ground. and also in terms of what's happening across the nation. And it's not got to do with SG50. It's got to do with the state of the economy. It's got to do with employment. It's got to do with policies. It's got to do with an understanding that given our size and limitations, the government is doing the best it can. And I think that that's how a majority of people are expressing their views across the different constituencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess that there are economic and other realities that people are being confronted by, and
Absolutely.
These are real.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Quick comments.
Yeah, just a real quick one. I totally agree with what the participants have said. Because in fact, I have this standing offer which I have made to senior staff in the Ministry of Health, and I've said, if you could disguise yourself and come in. I take junior college students who want to go into medical school. And I said, disguise yourself as a junior college student. It's a bit hard for some people. But come and tag along on a C-class ward round any day at random. You pick the day and talk to the patients. And then you'll realize, that these complicated schemes that we have, they falling through the cracks is a very strange way of describing what happens to most people in a C-class ward in a Singapore hospital. And it's not that they don't have the best intentions. Minister Shanmugam's colleagues have the best intentions in the world. But sometimes there's that disconnect, which I think was what people are talking about here. And it's not their fault. And sometimes it's the middle management which tries to protect them from the reality of what's happening on the ground. And I think that's exactly what I feel.
Thank you. Thank you, caller. Thank you very much, Raymond Raj. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, actually, can we have Christian ask the question first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I felt fortitude is a key word for me in a leader. When I was in Sarawak, I spent a little bit of time in the kampongs, and I noticed the characteristics of the village head and the kind of support he got from the people on the ground. And they really didn't have a lot of support from outside, but they were very sustainable. And they were all happy. All these people that I spent a few days with in Sarawak were extremely happy. I spoke to a guy who was 70 and he had 15 grandchildren. He had not a spot of white hair, and he looked at me, "How old are you, sir? How old are you, son?" And this is the reality in Singapore. I think I run an air conditioning company because I hate the heat. But some of my subcontractors who are electrical contractors, he said, "I went to your friend's place and I did for him free." I have a friend who's campaigning in the election, and I said, why? Why did you do that? He says, because I'm a worker, and I will vote for Workers' Party. And he had no other reason for wanting to vote for Workers' Party. So I think it's really, for the PAP or any other party, really like you mentioned earlier, some of the members mentioned, going to the ground, getting that feel, like the helicopter analogy, I really like that. But we have to remember that we start from the ground and then go up, right? Yeah, thank you.
Great point. All right. Yes, Praveen.
I sort of wanted to start from what she said earlier about social media and how it can sometimes be toxic. Like, I've written articles for today, and I recently wrote one for Inconvenient Questions. And you'd be surprised that you can write an article, and I've been called like a PAP lackey, and then for the same article, I'll have a relative call me and tell me, you better be careful, if not, you might not get employed in any ministries. and you're left completely shocked or surprised as to where you stand. And I think that's what's really missing. Like, in this, for me, the next elections and the elections after that and the ones after that, what I really want to see is I want to see us embrace a critical political culture, because if we don't, I seriously fear that we'll lapse into a cynical one.
Yeah.
And that I think is very pertinent.
And more accepting of contrary views.
Exactly.
And without having to look over your shoulder or the ceiling. Right. Yes. Any last two comments before I ask the panel to wrap? Yes.
I'll just say that if I were to look for one particular characteristic of any MP, would be humility. To that extent, I agree a lot with what Ben said. Basically, we should be heading towards, just look at the amount of talent that we have among our government people. We don't have all the answers, and it's by tapping on each other's views that we're able to go with that. Not just among political parties, but with civil society as well. And it shouldn't be a situation where we have to choose the leaders of our future, and because of that we must go with the smartest and the brightest and the people with the best integrity and so forth. But people who are able to make the best of ideas from everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. I think going into these elections, when I agree with Harasha's list of, I hope I got your name right, the list of attributes you look for, right? And with compassion, I would add things like empathy and understanding the groundswell and things like that. And I think going into the elections, people, when they look at the PAP and the opposition, I think that's kind of what a lot of people are looking for. But I think going into the elections, for example, for PAP MPs, you're going to kind of assume that the intelligence is a tick. You're going to assume that on the integrity, it's definitely past your 50%. We're talking 70, 80%, more likely 100%. There isn't really an issue there. What they're going to want to see with the MPs is, do you have the ability to connect with me? And then I will answer your question, how. When it comes to the opposition, they're going to assume that, and that's only because of the history of Singapore, that it has taken so much, you have to have so much guts and desire and courage to want to stand as an opposition MP, that you're going to assume that the integrity is there. That's just how most people are going to start. They want to see if there's intelligence. They want to see, they're going to assume that empathy is there. They're going to assume that you understand the common man. They want to see, do you have the intelligence? They want to see that, just prove to me that yours is integrity and you don't have an ulterior motive. And the only way people are going to mostly gauge all of this is how you speak during the next 9 days. That's going to be it. And they will look at stuff you've done. And for people who've been in government and who've had some opportunities to be in parliament, it will be what you said there. It will be the decisions you took. It's going to be all those things. And when you talk, whether you're able to tell, whether you speak at it at a helicopter view, or whether when you talk and you make your speeches, you are exhibiting an ability to understand the common man's problem, and do your anecdotes really touch people's souls? And for the opposition candidates, it will be when you speak, not just the bread and butter, coffee shop anecdotes, but do you have the ability to talk to me about the big ticket issues with the kind of intelligent assessment that I'm going to think you have got a tick on the first one?
And realism.
And realism.
Yeah.
And for a leader, yes, you want the helicopter view, but for the opposition parties, more, I think less, not helicopter, sorry, the general vision for Singapore. I think for opposition candidates, people are going to cut them a little bit more slack on that. They're going to want to see that you have some ideas for Singapore, and I agree with Ben that generally we all share the same ideas about what's good for Singapore, with some changes here and there. But they're going to want to see, are you articulate, and
good.
can you answer the questions well?
Stop you there. Thank you. Excellent. Yes, Gillian.
I think I would look for somebody who's a bridge builder, somebody who can bring consensus amidst a diversity, because Singapore is becoming so diverse in views, in value systems and things like that, which we have no control over. So a bridge builder, a consensus maker, and then clearly somebody who's able to manage complexity, because when we talk about the local, we don't want that to be set apart from the global. When we talk about the immediate, we don't want that to be set apart from what is long-term. So we don't want solutions that just solve the problem today and actually really hobble us for the future. For instance, the issue of taking out CPF money at 55. If we know we're going to age till really, if not 65, then really the stats says 80. I think we need to understand the complexities really to do with behavioral psychology as well. So somebody who can manage complexity. And finally, I think definitely empathy is quite key. But because you empathize, you are then able to really bring a person along to look at the complexities of the issue and then come to a broad consensus of where government can serve you and the rest has to be left to the market sector or the civic sector. Somebody who's able to say, guess what? I'm here to solve some of the problems that government is designed to solve. And then I'm going to have the courage enough to tell you that it is not going to be a government solution that can unwind the difficulties you face today. So I think it takes courage. So consensus, complexity, and courage.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, you've got the last word.
Last word, yeah. Is,
From the audience.
Just right. Because I actually want to ask Shanmugam, Paul, and Ben, what are the qualities that you would like to see in a voter?
Okay, good. Good. Courage. Don't leave out poor Eugene. Eugene, we'll start with you. Okay, in the interest of time, this is what I propose, okay? I'd like each of you start coming this way, and we'll let Shanmugam have the last word. Each one of you, keep it pithy, right? Answer Agnes's question, what would you like to see? And then wrap up, make your final comment.
Okay. Yeah. I think in terms of the voter, I would like them to make a considered decision based on a variety of factors and not just boil down to just one issue. I think if voters make the decision on one issue, I think there are enough issues in which people are angry about. But I think voters should also be knowledgeable, right? Recognizing that our policy options are in a way very limited, and so we should be careful about schemes or policies in which we promise the good things. I think, but I suppose the difficulty is for the voter to determine what is possible and what's not impossible. And of course, the fact that this is a rich country, or the perception that we're rich, makes it easier. The third quality is certainly that while we desire utopia, we recognize that utopia may not be possible. I think if we seek utopia, we may actually find dystopia. I think that's a concern, right? The idea that there'll be employment benefits for life, or that you don't have to worry about your children's education, everything will be paid for. My father used to tell me, right, money don't grow on trees. So I think that's something we should bear in mind. So I think those are three qualities. I don't know. I come to this election in a way with a sort of some trepidation. I think we're at this pivotal point in which voters will be asked to decide, to balance, the need for a strong government, but also the desire in the electorate for checks and balances as well as political diversity. And unfortunately, the ballot sheet doesn't enable you to do both, right? And so I think that's one dilemma that voters will have. Much as we are a great country, I think it was Agnes that said it, we're a great country, and I agree with that. I'm also somewhat puzzled by the sort of deep pockets of unhappiness that I seem to sense, whether it's among young voters who are voting for the first time, like students in university, to people in my generation, who are fairly well accomplished in their careers, and to the older folks as well. So I'm just very puzzled by these unhappiness, and I wonder whether there's a sense of frustration, or is it because that people have unrealistic expectations of what the political system can do, right? So and I think ultimately I really hope that these elections will not see the country divided. For me, elections every 4 to 5 years seems to be a point where the country seems divided. And then we spend the next 4 to 5 years trying to patch things up, before the fissures open again.
Right.
So a bit on a despondent.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, I'm going to give you a very cliched answer. What do I expect from a voter? And the answer is nothing. Because the reality is, and I think this cartoon has been going around on the internet, where you check, do you want a master of the people, or do you want a servant of the people? And as a Democratic Party, I think, our job as politicians or aspiring politicians is actually to really listen to what the people want. What the people want, and if we disagree with what they want, we have to convince them that what they really want is what we think that is our contribution to what they want, and what they want in the long term, not the short term of what they want. So if in the long term they want a democratic, free society where there's freedom of expression, freedom of speech, it's not going to happen overnight. But we think that the first step is to get 11 SDP MPs into Parliament so we can start asking questions about freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of information. We cannot form the government with 11 MPs, but at least it's a start. And so those are the fundamental civil liberties which attracted me to the party. And the idea that once you have these civil liberties, then you start seeing the economic progress, the innovation, the creativity, what Singapore needs to face the demographic challenge. We cannot depend on labor-intensive industry anymore, and what we need is the spark that can only come from a little bit of chaos and dissent.
Right. Thank you, Ben.
Well, representing SPP and DPP, or party names, both party names have the word people and democratic. I think the thing that we would expect of a voter is to vote for the person who's contesting that you feel connects with you, has all the qualities that you mentioned, is a familiar face, and has stayed constant election after election after election. And I would here differ from some of you who said that we've only got 9 days to assess. You may have 9 days to assess, but the residents where we walk the ground, we've been walking the ground for the past 4 years. Some of our colleagues have been walking the ground for the past 8 years, and the residents know us because we're there. Right? And it is a familiar face. They see us a lot more, as from what they say, than some of their MPs. And I would encourage voters to be bold, be courageous, vote the candidate that you feel best understands you and you best trust to bring that voice into Parliament. And I will just end on this note and say again that this election for us, we believe that it's about the voters wanting to vote somebody that they trust and that they know and can bring their issues to Parliament and stand facing the government for them, right, and not the other way, explaining the government to them. Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I disagree much with Ben. And most of the things that he said, I think you would expect from your representatives. I think that the task of the MP is to both listen to the people and then also to explain government policies in a way that they can understand. And I think you need people who are going to be able to meaningfully contribute to debate, honest people, people of character and integrity, who will take care of the residents and who will have the interests of Singapore at heart. And really the approach by the voters, I think, and our Singaporean voter is a savvy voter. They know, they look at track records, they understand. Pockets of dissatisfaction, even in the 70s, 25% of the population regularly voted against the government. I mean, leave aside the PAP. In a modern society, which is why I started out by saying, you would expect sections of the people to be disagreeing with you. Yeah. That is par for the course. So I'm not too concerned about the fact that people have different viewpoints, disagree with the government. I accept it, and I think that is, in fact, healthy. It is for us to persuade people that the majority would benefit from what we are doing, and accept that even for those who would benefit, many of them may disagree. So, 40% disagreeing, 35% disagreeing on anything, and that's a significant number if you take the electorate. 35% is nearly 1 million people. And if they are spread out, as that gentleman says, all over, including Pasir Ris, then you get the feeling there are people who are expressing their views. And there are people who substantively agree with as well. And all we can say is we have to do our best and then ask people to judge us based on that.
Well, let me perhaps try and sum this up. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but essentially what I can say is that the opposition has always got the advantage. Has always got the advantage of highlighting all the issues, all the policies, all the gaps, without having to directly account yet, because you're not government. The disadvantage that you have is that you don't have a track record. Perhaps with the exception of Workers' Party. You don't have a track record. So it's very difficult, and Chamsitong, yeah. It's very difficult for people to judge you by what you profess that you can do, right? So it's a negative in that sense, So people aren't sure whether they can go with what you're saying. With the ruling party, the advantage is that you've got a track record, you're familiar, people know who you are, you're in the news on a regular basis, okay? Sometimes that may not be an advantage. Okay, but at the end of the day, the disadvantage of being the ruling party is that election is where you have to account for a whole lot more. Right? I mean, it is a disadvantage, which actually is the opposition's advantage. So I think, for me, if you ask me, what is it that voters should look for, we should strike a balance between these two and be realistic about it. So
it's
you
not
should
wrong to be accountable. It's the very essence of democracy.
No. What I'm
you
saying
have to be
is,
accountable.
No, you've had your say.
You've had right through.
Now it's my say.
5-year report card.
No, but what I'm saying is, it is hard because people are going to ask you a whole lot of questions. You've come up with policies and you've got to defend those. It's not easy, right? So for me, what I'm looking for is an individual who is looking for both the ability to think and defend and persuade, and very importantly, the compassion, and more than anything else, the ability and the willingness to listen. Now, I think that is a serious deficit among a lot of the candidates that I'm seeing, PAP as well as the opposition, in not having the capacity to listen. And listen with an open mind, right? Now, I'm hoping that debates of this nature, open, free-flowing, would actually be the order of the day in the years to come. Not just during election, but in the cause of things. Because people get to see a lot more. It is about the dynamics of communication. Today, I am sure the audience here, us, as well as people watching from home, would be able to see a lot more of the unspoken telling the truth. A lot more will come through in the way we react through our expressions when someone else speaks. Those things matter more. And it can only surface when you have spontaneous discussions. And I'd like to end with an appeal. There will always be contrary views, but it does not have to become adversarial.
Yes, that's right.
There will always be, and there should be, a contest of ideas. But let's not lose the capacity for decency and not go into gutter politics. Whoever fires the first salvo should be ashamed. I would put it that way. Let's stand by a certain code of ethics and be gentlemanly in the way we conduct ourselves in the days to come in the hustings. And I think all Singaporeans expect that of all parties and all candidates. With that, I'd like you to join me in thanking our panel, right? Minister Shanmugam. And I must say, I'm very grateful to the PAP for actually having a senior minister in cabinet join us in this discussion, because it shows a commitment through transparency and being accountable. And I really appreciate this, right? Benjamin Pui, Secretary General of the DPP and a candidate in this election for the SPP. Yes. Professor Paul Tambaya, who is representing here the SDP. And last but certainly not least, my good friend Eugene Tan, who is today even more familiar on TV than the anchors. Well, I'd like to wish you guys all the best.
Thank you.
And may the best man or woman win. Thank you. Right. With that, I'd like to, and you, of course, the audience, you've done a great job, and I'm glad that we had the wisdom of inviting you. Thank you very much for joining us. You should clap. And our viewers at home, you can catch this at www.iq.sg. Do keep your inconvenient questions coming and stay rightly informed, engaged on the things that matter to all of us. Air your views, log into our website, as I said, www.iq.sg. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest and reasoned analysis of the upcoming GE. Next Monday, debateIQ goes live again with a review of the past week of campaigning. It promises to be another robust and insightful discussion, and don't forget to tune in from 6 to 8 p.m. Monday, 7th November. You're watching debateIQ live, only on IQ. See you at the polls. Good luck, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were very well prepared.
Oh, no.
Thank you. Could we have a quick group picture here?
I don't. It's. I come prepared.